Hey guys, welcome to the Alt Shift X live stream Q&A discussion for Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 2. And man, this whole thing was at Winterfell. I was surprised that this entire thing was like preparation for the Battle of Winterfell next episode. First episode was pretty slow. First episode was mostly about reunions and like reminding us of who all the characters are. And now episode 2 is like also mostly about just like setting up reunions and relationships and preparation for what's coming next. This is a third of the season done already. We're 2 episodes in to a 6 episode season. And very little has happened outside of just sort of like setting up relationships, setting up future conflicts. So I thought that was quite surprising. It'll be interesting to see how the pace picks up once shit starts getting real. So let's talk about what happened in the episode and answer some of your questions. And thanks for the super chat, Poos on Poos. So the episode opener, we had basically the same opening sequence as last time. I think the blue tiles here, the White Walker icy army symbol, has advanced further across the map now. You can see that they've gotten past Last Hearth, so that represents the fact that the White Walkers have passed Last Hearth. They're getting closer to Winterfell, and they'll arrive next season. Next episode. And the opening sequence also spent a bunch of time around King's Landing, which I thought was odd given that King's Landing wasn't in this episode. But I suppose they didn't want to just be hovering around Winterfell for the entirety of the opening sequence. And I think we'll try and do like a quick summary, and then we'll respond to more of the super chats is what we'll do. But thanks KW, Aaron, and Nonsensic Alexis. So we started with Jaime Lannister on trial, being judged, which is such a huge emotional thing for Jaime, given that his whole emotional beef is over hating being judged by Eddard Stark after he killed King Aerys. He said, "By what right does the wolf judge the lion?" Jaime was this proud guy who didn't want anyone questioning him or looking down on him. And yet in this episode, Jaime really embraces humility in a way that he never has before. At the same time, he is pretty defiant about some of the things that he did, like when he attacked Ned Stark and all of that. He refused to apologize for that stuff. So in some ways, he's embracing humility, but he's still not completely, I suppose I'm saying. And Daenerys, of course, is pretty upset with the man who killed his father. Daenerys does know that the Mad King was like this horrible tyrant, but that doesn't make her any less upset to see the man who killed him standing in front of her. But Jaime is saved when Brienne stands up and vouches for him. Because Brienne, of course, spent so much time with Jaime, and knows that he's changed. It was sort of odd, I thought, when she specifically brings up like, "Oh, Jaime saved me from being raped by Locke and his men." I feel like it was like the more impressive feat that Jaime did was going back and saving Brienne from the bear at Harrenhal. That was more sort of his heroic turning point than the rape thing. But in any case, Brienne argues that Jaime's this honorable man. And I feel like what needed to be said there was the fact that Jaime has changed. Because, Jaime, like on the one hand, you've got people saying, "Oh, Jaime's this honorable person who like helped Brienne and so on," but you've also got people saying, "Well, Jaime's this dishonorable person who killed King Aerys and whatever." I think the bit that needed to be acknowledged is that, well, yeah, he was this horrible person and now he's not, which is not something they really say. But yeah, in the end, Jon basically says that, hey, we need everyone we can get, and Sansa's convinced by Brienne, and so Jaime's on side. I'm kind of surprised by Sansa's relationship with Brienne. Sansa has like totally embraced Brienne as this person who she can like absolutely trust. She says that she trusts Brienne more than anyone. And I'm not sure about that because they haven't known each other all that long, Sansa and Brienne. It seems like a quick time for like her to get to trust Brienne. And also like in season 7, episode 6 or whenever it is, when like Sansa, sends Brienne away to King's Landing, that didn't seem like a moment of trust. Like we haven't got many Sansa Brienne scenes, so it's sort of weird to have Sansa express her total trust like that. Oh fuck it, we'll jump around a bit. So Kim Z24 asks, what did Bran tell Tyrion, do you think? And that's a really, really interesting bit that happens after the War Council, when basically Tyrion comes up to Bran and he's like, hey, what's going on? Like, you're this like magical guy, you're in a wheelchair, you got all these visions, you know everything. Can you tell me what that's like? Can you tell me what you know? Can you tell me what that whole situation is? Which sort of like in the same way that people don't talk much about Jon's death then resurrection, it is similarly weird that no one talks to Bran about his like, hey, you've become an omniscient god. What's the vibe there? What's the jam? So Tyrion does that, and then just when Tyrion sits down to D&M with Bran, the scene ends and it just cuts to black. So we don't know what Tyrion and Bran talk about, and that must have been a really interesting conversation, right? What did Bran say? And then when we see Tyrion again, like he's not acting particularly different. So I suppose Tyrion wasn't told anything earth-shattering. But you got to wonder, like, what information was imparted there? What is that relationship between Bran and Tyrion going to result in? So yeah, I'm really interested in that. Although, like, we don't want to get overly conspiratorial about it or overly, speculative, because, like, remember when Cersei and Tyrion had that conversation in season 7, episode 7, and everyone was like, whoa, what was a secret thing that Cersei and Tyrion said to each other? Well, as far as we know at this point, there was no secret thing. They just agreed that, okay, Cersei would help the Starks and whatever, and Cersei tricked Tyrion. So, like, maybe there wasn't anything super secret that happened here with Tyrion and Bran, but we'll have to see. We have a question from... thank you, Jake. Thank you, George. Thank you, Anuska. Anuska asks about Jenny's song. So Jenny's song was sung by Podrick at the very end of the episode, and Jenny's song refers to Jenny of Old Stones, who was... Let me just pull up the song. So we have this song that plays over a montage of a few different characters. And Jenny of Old Stones was this common woman, apparently, who's quite mysterious. She apparently claimed to be descended from the children of the forest, the elf goblin people. And Jenny of Old Stones was in love with Duncan Targaryen, who was one of the sons of Egg, for those who have read Duncan Egg. And Duncan Targaryen was the heir to the throne, but Duncan gave up his claim to the throne in order to love Jenny. He loved Jenny so much that he gave up his crown to be with her. And there's also a character in the books called the Ghost of Highheart, who also seems to be this sort of part child of the forest creature. And she has this sort of mournful vibe where she's like talking about, the people who she's lost. And she has this very sort of melancholy, mournful vibe, which is interesting. But I think what's most relevant here is the idea of, Duncan gave up his crown for his love, Jenny, which is relevant to Jon and Daenerys, because that revelation at the end where, Jon tells Daenerys that, like, hey, I'm Aegon Targaryen, and I have a claim to the throne. That could raise this idea of, well, hey, maybe Daenerys will give up her claim to the throne so that she can be with Jon, or Jon can give up his claim on the throne. Although, of course, they can solve that whole rival claims to the throne thing by marrying. Like last episode, Davos suggested that Daenerys and Jon should just get married, and that would solve the problem of their rival claims to the throne. So yeah, in this situation, the romance and the throne are not incompatible. They can be in love and they can share the throne, you would think. But yeah, that's not how they're playing it. But maybe Jenny's song and that idea of, tragic love is just the vibe that they're going for. Nolan asks, does Tyrion know how to kill White Walkers? Yeah, it's common knowledge that Dragonglass kills White Walkers. Yeah, thanks Tim, thanks Majushka. Yeah, I'm not going to respond to every super chat, so don't be offended, but thank you for them. Uh, How Internet asks about the knighting of Brienne, and yeah, that was fucking beautiful. I mean, I feel a bit bad for Podrick, because Podrick was the one who asked to be knighted. He's been saying that for seasons, that he actually wants to be a knight. Brienne, I'm pretty sure, never actually says that she wants to be a knight at any point. But of course, it makes a huge amount of sense because she is, like Jaime lists the qualities of a knight when Brienne's being knighted. I charge you to defend the innocent. I charge you to be brave. I charge you to be honorable and all of that. And those are all the qualities that Brienne upholds more than anybody else. Like the whole point of Brienne as a character in a lot of ways is to say that, hey, like, this patriarchal world is excluding Brienne from the institution of knighthood, even though Brienne upholds the values of knighthood better than any man in the series. So it's a vindication for Brienne to finally be made a knight. And personally, it's important that she's getting Jaime's approval. Like, their relationship, of course, is so has changed so much. Brienne would have been appalled by the idea of the Kingslayer knighting her back in the day. But Brienne's emotion over being knighted by Jaime represents how much her respect for Jaime has grown, I think. Torre asks, do you think Bran will walk into Viserion? Yeah, I'd say so. And PB reckons that Podrick sang to those girls in season 3, and that's why they were so impressed by his performance. All right, we'll try and be chronological, because I'm not sure whether we want to jump around too much or not. All right, so we talked about Jaime being judged by Daenerys and Sansa. So he's accepted into the army of good guys. And then and then, of course, Grey Worm returns the sword Widow's Wail to Jaime. And the significance of Widow's Wail is, of course, that it was forged from the metal of ice, the Stark ancestral sword. So Brienne's using Oathkeeper, and Jaime's using Widow's Wail, which are both from Ned Stark's steel. So in a way, Ned and Ice are still defending Winterfell through Jaime and Brienne, which is a nice bit of symbolism. I think the ghost of Ned Stark is looming over this entire season 8 in a lot of ways. Like, they talk about how Tyrion and Davos and Tormund and all these guys are preparing to fight to defend Winterfell, when all of those people had at various points fought against the Starks. And I think it's kind of the ghost of Ned Stark, like the idea of Stark, unity and honor and as being a leader in defending against the darkness and whatever. I think Ned's values are shining through in this alliance of the good guys. So I think that's part of why. I think that's part of what's going on there, the legacy of Ned Stark. So yeah, we'll keep going chronologically. So we have a scene with Daenerys criticizing Tyrion because the revelation has come out that Cersei's not actually planning to come and help the good guys. So Tyrion's attempted alliance with her has failed. Tyrion misjudged Cersei. He was tricked. And this is yet another failure on the long laundry list of Tyrion's recent fuck-ups, like the peace in Meereen that failed, and the White Hunt that got Daenerys' dragon killed, and his war plans that got the Dornish and the Ironborn captured and whatever. So Tyrion's fucked up a lot, and Daenerys is holding him to account. And Tyrion reckons that he'll lose the handship at one point or another. And I'm not really sure where this is going. Like they've really just ground Tyrion down over the last couple of seasons. Like, his early seasons were all about, trying to find love and power in King's Landing, and then he loses everything after killing his father and killing Shae, and then, like, Daenerys becomes a new thing that he believes in, but now they're just grinding that away as well. Like, I don't know what the overall arc is meant to be building towards. Like, is Tyrion going to be in a situation where he feels useful and helpful, or is he going to be rejected by Daenerys and, like, who... like there's ideas of, like, Tyrion betraying people, but, like, the only person Tyrion could betray Daenerys for would be Cersei, and I don't see that happening. I mean, I'd like to see Tyrion express mercy towards Cersei. I think that might make a certain amount of sense. He wants to protect his terrible fucked up sister. But I don't know. Tyrion's arc is weird. So that happens, and we have a scene where Arya creeps on Gendry, who's working away in the forge, and they have a bit of eyebrow action back and forth. And Arya asks Gendry to make a special weapon, and Gendry's like, "Oh, you shouldn't be fighting in the battle because you're just a little girl," and she's like, "Man, I've killed more than you'd believe," and she does this whole sort of badass thing of, "Ooh, look, I can throw dragonglass daggers real good." I don't remember the part in the Faceless Men training montage where Arya learns to throw dragonglass daggers with pinpoint accuracy, but the point is that she's just an all-round ninja assassin badass at this point. So she's more than qualified to fight against the White Walkers, more than Gendry is. And I think it's interesting that, like, these two scenes with Gendry and Arya, they have like this duality between death and life. So, like, in this scene, they're talking about the dead, and in the next scene, they have sex, which is making love and light and life. So there's that duality, which, like, is very relevant to Arya as a person who's, like, associated with the Faceless Men. She is of death. Speaking of the Ghost of High Heart, Arya meets the Ghost of High Heart, this person who loved Jenny's song, and the Ghost of High Heart looks at Arya and she's like, "Oh, get away from me! I've had enough of death. I've had enough of mourning." So Arya embodies death. So it's nice to have, in that sex scene, a moment of, like, life and light. Cool. So we have that scene between Gendry and Arya. Also, this costume's kind of odd. Is that meant to be a Riverlander? This costume, I don't know. This guy looks like a Tully to me. With those sort of, like, scaled armor here, I thought looked a bit like some costumes we saw in the Riverlands. I don't know who this guy's meant to be, these soldiers, but whatever. So then we have a scene with Jaime and Brienne, with Jaime and Bran. And Bran did Jaime a solid by not telling anyone about Jaime having pushed Bran from that tower. And Jaime's kind of surprised that Bran didn't bring that up. Jaime comes and immediately apologizes, which again is something that the old Jaime would never have done, I think. The old Jaime never would have come and immediately apologized for what he did wrong. So that's the more humble Jaime again. And Bran just sort of says, "Well, fact is facts. You know, you did what you did to protect your family." Bran isn't mad about his crippling, because he argues that, well, if that didn't happen, then we wouldn't be where we are. It's, like, destined to happen. I became Brandon Stark because you pushed me from that window, and you became this more humble, heroic Jaime because you pushed me. So, like, as the Three-Eyed Raven, as this sort of dehumanized, all-knowing eye, he just sort of accepts that, well, this is how things lay out. You know, the Trafalgarians from what's the Kurt Vonnegut book? Is it Slaughterhouse-Five? There's, like, these aliens in that book who are unstuck from time, and they can see the past and the present and the future all sort of interchangeably. Like, they just see all of time at once. So they're not too worried about, like, events, because they know that, well, you know, the bad things that are in the future, they've essentially already happened and you can't change them. And the things that are in the past, it's all sort of the same. And I think Bran is sort of like a Trafalgarian because he's similarly sort of unstuck from time, and he's sort of not too worried about what happens in the present. Anyway, So yeah, Bran says, "Yeah, I'm not Bran anymore." And yeah, so, like, I really liked the idea that Bran might have become more human again as a result of seeing Jaime and remembering what happened to him, but I guess not. And yeah, I don't really know where Bran's arc is going either, because, like, if he's just going to stay a robot for the rest of his arc and, you know, going to do some magical things against the Night King, like, surely there's got to be a moment at the end. He's like, you know, he looks at his family and he says, "Oh, sister, brother," like, he actually has a moment of humanity before he, you know, becomes a tree or dies or whatever happens. That would be nice if Bran had another moment of humanity, but, like, it's not something that's happened yet. Yeah, so Bran explains the reason. You know, he didn't want to tell everyone that Jaime pushed Bran because that would get Jaime killed, probably. And then Bran says, "Oh, well, you know, there might not be an afterwards," which raises the question of, like, why is Bran doing all this, like, all these calculations to save everyone and to get Jaime to help fight in the war? Why is he doing all these things if there's a if he doesn't think it's going to save the world. And of course, Bran does this in a very sort of open-ended way by saying, well, how do you know there isn't afterwards? Like, he's not saying we're all going to lose and die. He's just saying, oh, well, maybe we won't all win. Like, doesn't he know? Doesn't Bran, the person who can see the future, like, doesn't he know whether this will end well or not? Bran's being frustratingly ambiguous, possibly because he knows that this is just sort of the way things have to unfold. Bran has to be vague in order for things to turn out the way they are destined to turn out. So we have the situation at Winterfell. Everyone's preparing for this battle. Jaime and Tyrion chat, and it seems as though Jaime's like pretty chill about Tyrion having murdered their father. You'd think that was more of an issue. At least it was last season, but now they're relatively relaxed. Except we see these Northerners are spitting at the sight of the Lannister brothers because they fought a war with the Lannisters, and because Jaime is the Kingslayer, and because Tyrion is the twisted demon monkey imp. So I'm glad they're remembering that. Like, it's not all the good guys coming together to sing Kumbaya. There is still those old grudges that are there and are causing tension. And the masses rejoice. And we got these goofy sort of palisade things with dragonglass spikes on them. I mean, let me jump ahead and say it now. I think it's really silly that they're doing these war plans the way that they are. Because, like, they're relying on, like, infantry and palisades and all these sorts of defenses in order to defeat the dead, when the obvious weapon to defeat the dead is the dragons. Like, where's the white dragon? Like, Season 7, Episode 6, we saw how effective the dragons are against the dead. Like, we need a bit of this going on, don't we? Isn't this the best way to defeat the dead? Shouldn't, like, Daenerys just be flying out with her dragons right now and just preemptively burning all of the whites? Like, why are they using foot soldiers, all these, like, northern men, women, and children holding dragonglass axes? Why doesn't Daenerys just fly out and burn them right now? I mean, the real problem, I suppose, is the Night King and Viserion, the White Walker's dragon. Like, that seems like the real threat. But, there's no reason not to just, start that battle now, right? Daenerys should be scouting ahead, preventing Last from being taken. Like, the dragons didn't even appear in this episode. Surely the dragons are more valuable than all of these soldiers put together. And, I guess the answer is because, they just want to keep things dramatic, and it's got to be person-to-person combat so that they can have all the drama with, Jaime and Brienne and Grey Worm all possibly dying, so... and yeah, people in the chat are talking about the spears, and yeah, the spear is an issue. But, if both of Dany's dragons flew at the Night King at once, fire blazing, like, surely that would be worth a go, you'd think. Anyway, so, we'll get back to the episode, and we were up to the bit where Tyrion and Jaime were talking. And they talk about Cersei, and they talk about how Jaime's like, oh, well, Cersei always, like, manipulates people, and she, like, misled me, and, that's just the way she is. She's fooled me more than anyone. But Tyrion points out that, well, no, Jaime always knew that Cersei was this manipulative person. I mean, what's Jaime's line? Why have the gods made me love a hateful woman? Jaime always knew that Cersei was a hateful woman. And at the time, he was a pretty hateful man himself. So I think that's sort of why he went along with it. And Tyrion's just sort of pointing that out. That Jaime, it's not as if... It's that Jaime has changed is what's happened. And then they talk about how Tyrion wanted to die at the age of 80 in his own bed with a belly full of wine and a girl on his cock, which apparently is like a catchphrase. Like, I always like to think that when Tyrion first said that, which was like season 1 Tyrion with Shagger and the Mountain Clansmen, I liked to think that he was making it up on the spot. I thought that was the first time that Tyrion had ever said at the age of 80 with a girl on my cock, etc. But the fact that Jaime knows it off by heart suggests that this is sort of something that Tyrion has repeated over the years, which is a bit less impressive. This is the moment when Tyrion says that he's surrounded by the mountain clansmen in season 1, and he wins them over by talking about his dick. In the previous Old Shift X video, we did make fun of the show for talking so much about butts and cocks and dicks lately. And people have rightly pointed out that, yeah, the show has always talked about dicks and butts. But I think it's definitely fair to say that they're doing a lot more of that. Like, I swear to God, balls are brought up almost every episode these days, when they weren't in the past. So I think there is a change and a difference there. So back to the episode, we had that conversation with Jaime and Tyrion. I like how they've stuck dragonglass everywhere. They must have a shit ton of dragonglass. They did say that there was a mountain of dragonglass under Dragonstone. So I suppose they've got plenty to spare if they're just like randomly sticking all this stuff at the top of the walls. Why are they putting it there, but not there? Wouldn't the Whites climb there as... Will the Whites be able to climb the walls? Do you think we're going to see some like World War Z shit where like these piles, these hordes of zombies are going to like make ramps up the sides of the walls to climb over, like a human hill rising above the walls? That would be crazy. But yeah, again, I think it's so silly that they're fighting the Whites, the army of the dead, like on the ground with these like physical defenses. They should just be flying over them and burning them with the dragons, you know? They should just be burning them with the dragons, but whatever. Podrick is a hunk now, and he is training this kid, and he's like a good fighter now. Seeing Podrick's growth over the years has been great, because he started out as this meek, stammering boy, but now he's this much more self-assured, capable squire. He's still a squire, but like, you know, he's an accomplished squire now. I still would like to see him knighted before the end of the series. So we have Jaime and Brienne watching Podrick. He's come a long way, and Brienne. There's this great awkward conversation between Jaime and Brienne. Like, they've just reunited. They obviously have this deeply intimate relationship. They've changed each other. They've learned from each other. Now they're finally back together, fighting together in the final battle. And the topic of conversation is the quality of the ground. They talk about, oh, yes, the ground sure is good. Left flank, right flank. Oh, there's a rise. We should get an advantage. Ground. Like, what are they doing talking about ground? Like, that's what Brienne sort of does. She's like, okay, what's happening here? What is our relationship? Why are we talking about ground? We're in love. We like have this bond. We need to figure out who we are to each other. Last night on Earth. Like, are we gonna smang? Are we gonna fight? Are we gonna... What's happening here? Brienne says. And then Jaime has this beautiful sort of moment of humility where he's like, hey, I'm not a good fighter anymore. I used to, like, Jaime's whole identity was that he was the greatest warrior in Westeros, like the most skilled swordsman there was. And now he's like, well, I'm not that person anymore. That thing that used to define me, I no longer have. And he says, you know, but you are a great warrior, and I submit to your authority, if you'll have me. And Brienne accepts Jaime's service. So that's a huge moment for Jaime. Like Jaime is acknowledging that he is in some ways lesser than he was, but in some ways he's so much more than he was, because he is acknowledging his weakness and acknowledging Brienne's strength and the power in their unity and their alliance. So that's huge. But yeah, also I think from Brienne's perspective, she's just sort of suspicious about the whole relationship between Jaime and Brienne. Like, they talked about this in the Inside the Episode feature. One of Brienne's like defining stories is this whole thing about how when she was young, her father wanted her to get married, and so her father had this ball where all of these eligible young men came and hung out with her and tried to seduce her, and like she was really surprised that everyone was being quite nice to her. And for a moment she sort of let herself believe that, oh, these men are attracted to me, they're being nice to me, I have value as like a feminine woman. And then it turned out that those men were playing a game, and like a cruel game where they were pretending to like her and pretending to be nice to her as a joke, as like this frat boy competition to see who could make her think that they liked her, and who could have sex with her. And so Brienne was hurt and betrayed by that, and she's been really suspicious of like men and men's affections ever since. And I think that's part of why Brienne is not super willing to, you know, trust this relationship that she has with Jaime now. So Brienne's past is sort of stopping her from fully expressing that, but I think that comes out a bit more later when Jaime knights Brienne. And then we have this conversation between Daenerys and Jorah. And Daenerys is feeling a bit under siege. Have you done something to offend me? Because Daenerys used to be like the unquestioned ruler of this massive army, all these supporters who are totally devoted to her. Like, she's led this Khalasar, she's been Misa to the slavers in Meereen, she's got all these totally loyal servants for like Jorah and Missandei and Grey Worm and Barristan and Tyrion and whatever. And now all of a sudden she's in a place where there are multiple competing rulers who and loyalties are divided to lots of different people. Daenerys is not the queen bee here anymore. Like, there's multiple people she's competing with. And so I think she's finding that difficult, not being solely in charge anymore. And Jorah comes in, and Jorah's actually an absolute hero here, because he comes in and says, hey, Tyrion has had failings, but at least Tyrion has acknowledged his failings and he's grown from it, and I still think Tyrion is worth something to you. And I hope that Jorah will be right. I hope that Tyrion will redeem himself and prove his value to Daenerys and make up for his past mistakes, because he hasn't done that yet. But yeah, Jorah's putting in a good word for Tyrion, which is all the better of him, given that Jorah had wanted to be Hand of the Queen to Daenerys, and Tyrion took that place. Tyrion became Hand when Jorah wanted to be Dany's Hand. In the past, Jorah has been an arsehole. Jorah has manipulated Daenerys by speaking against any of the male advisors around her. Jorah was controlling, tried to isolate Daenerys, and was distrusting of any other men. Now he's doing the opposite. He's putting in a good word for Tyrion. So Jorah, I think, has grown a lot, and Jorah has become much less self-interested, much less creepy, much less gross, and a much better man. And then Jorah also suggests that Daenerys should talk with Sansa. Because the division between Sansa and Daenerys is sort of the fault line in this great alliance of all the heroes. Daenerys and Sansa not getting on is a problem, because they need to be totally united in this final war. So Daenerys goes and chats with Sansa. We also see this fella Bronze Yohn Royce. And it's kind of odd that Bronze Yohn Royce is so loyal to the Starks and Winterfell, because he comes from the Vale. He doesn't even go here. He's not from here. So why is Bronze Yohn willing to bring his knights and all the soldiers of the Vale to die for the Starks? I mean, it's true that their overlord, Sweet Robin, that snotty little kid, he did order the Valemen to help the Starks, but only specifically to get the Boltons out of Winterfell. Bronze Yohn is really going above and beyond by fighting the army of the dead with his Valemen. And his loyalty to Sansa is weird. Does Bronze Yohn know that Sansa lied to Yohn about the death of Lysa? Because there was that whole thing where Sansa helped Littlefinger by lying for Littlefinger about Lysa's death. Sansa has manipulated Yohn, and I suppose he doesn't know that. And I don't suppose it'll ever come up, but they're just using him as a stand-in for the Vale, I guess. So anyway, we have this conversation between Daenerys and Sansa, and they talk about how... Well, yeah, first they bond over, we're both, powerful women who've had to struggle against obstacles in order to assert ourselves and to be great rulers. We've done a damn good job of it, hell yeah, feminism. And they're at odds with each other, and Daenerys tries to repair their relationship. And they achieve that by talking about Jon, because they both care about Jon. And Sansa's suspicion, we sort of learn, why Sansa is so... aggressive towards Daenerys, and that's because she's concerned that Daenerys is manipulating Jon. Men do stupid things for women. Sansa seems worried that Daenerys is exploiting Jon's love in order to make him serve her. But Daenerys explains that it's kind of the exact opposite, because Daenerys' whole goal was to take the Iron Throne until Jon came along and said, hey, look at my abs, we need to fight the army of the dead. And then Daenerys was like, oh shit, okay, I'll just abandon my entire cause that I've been fighting for all this time in order to help Jon and his cause. So Daenerys is saying that, if anything, Jon is manipulating me because I'm doing what he wants. It's not Daenerys manipulating Jon. So that makes a lot of sense. And Sansa kind of accepts this. She's like, all right, you got a good point. it's more like, Jon is bringing Daenerys on side, so this is a good thing. This is a good relationship, and they hold hands, and it's all like yay. But then they talk about this other issue, which is that Daenerys wants to rule all of Westeros, including the North. The North was a subsidiary of the Iron Throne for the last 300 years, but then when Robb Stark was crowned king in the North, he declared independence from the Iron Throne. So during most of the Game of Thrones series, the North has been this independent kingdom. But now Daenerys wants to bring it back as part of the Seven Kingdoms. And Sansa doesn't want that. What happens afterwards, she says? What about the North? We said we'd never bow to anyone ever again. So Sansa really wants the North to remain independent. She doesn't want Daenerys, this power-hungry monarch, to own the North. Which, that's a legitimate concern, but like it's not as pressing as the army of the dead that's right outside knocking on the door, right? Shouldn't Sansa realize that like uniting with Daenerys for now, in order to save them from the apocalypse, is more important than the future? Sovereignty. That's the word I was trying to think of. Sovereignty, the idea of like a state being independent and determining its own future. Sansa's very concerned about the sovereignty of the North right now, which is a legitimate concern, but like it's not as... I don't think now's the time, is what I'm trying to say. I think Sansa should worry about the North's independence after they've dealt with the million zombies knocking on their door. But anyway, so Theon turns up, and Theon's like, hey girl, I got some Ironmen, I want to help out. Theon's trying to redeem himself for having attacked Winterfell and betrayed the Starks before, and they hug, and it's quite emotional. So there's a strong bond between Sansa and Theon, which I find a little bit surprising. Like we haven't had a lot of Sansa-Theon scenes in the series. Like, they suffered together in Winterfell under Ramsay, when Sansa married Ramsay. So, they sort of bonded over that. But, like, for most of that period, Sansa was, like, pretty horrible to Theon. Like Sansa was really mean to Theon for most of Season 5 because she thought that Theon killed Bran and Rickon, and because he betrayed the North and stuff. So she, like, that was not a good relationship. And like at the end of Season 5 and start of Season 6, Theon helped Sansa escape from Winterfell, and that was good of him. But like they only spent like one episode together before Theon then ran off to the Iron Islands and left Sansa behind. So like I didn't see a lot of Sansa-Theon bonding then. And of course, they were at Winterfell together back in the day, but like we never saw a scene with Theon and Sansa together in that time. So I guess Theon is like a reminder to Sansa of the good old days at Winterfell when everyone was together in some sense. But yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. Sansa appreciates Theon for rescuing her from Winterfell, but it still feels like they haven't earned quite the depth of emotion and bond that they're displaying here. But that's just my opinion. It makes sense. So we got these kids and these common people. I'm really glad we've got scenes with the common people because like part of the point of the Game of Thrones books especially is to show that all these wars and battles for supremacy that are happening with the nobility, you got to remember Game of Thrones is a story mostly about the 1% of the most powerful people in this kingdom, but there are thousands and thousands of just normal ordinary working people just trying to get by, like those guys shoveling shit in Monty Python who they well, it's not really like Monty Python. But the point is that these guys are hurt by the decisions that the High Lord... When the High Lords play their Game of Thrones, it's the common people who suffer most. And here we get to sort of see the suffering of the common people. It's like, this poor fucker, he's not a soldier, and yet now this guy from the Stormlands, Davos, this foreign guy's, putting a sword in one hand and a bowl of soup in the other and saying, off you go, fight the zombies. And he's saying, what the fuck's a zombie? And then, like what? He didn't ask for this. And then we have this heartbreaking scene with this child, this burn-faced child, who's saying like, oh, like, she's apparently alone here. Like, we don't see any family. She mentions brothers who are soldiers, who I suppose are dead. And she's like this tough kid who's like, I'll fight too. And so, Gilly sends her down to the crypts. But, they are recruiting child soldiers to fight against the dead. Like in last season, they were training children to fight. So, this kid's down in the crypts, but there are lots of other kids who are going to be eaten by zombies. And I'm really glad they're sort of taking a moment to sort of show that, these people exist and they're having a rough time and it's fucked up. It's also cool to see Gilly becoming a sort of leader in this scene. Gilly's hanging around Winterfell and helping the common people know where to go and whatever. And it's nice to see Gilly step up like that. Because remember how Gilly was so vulnerable and weak and beaten down in Craster's Keep back in Season 2. So she's really stepping up now, which is nice to see. And then we have Jon Snow rocking up and seeing his mate Ed coming back to Winterfell. Ed was one of Jon's best friends from the Night's Watch, and then Tormund slide tackles him from the side, which is fun. Tormund and Jon, of course, have like a pretty long and complex relationship, because Jon joined the Wildlings at one point, and then he betrayed the Wildlings. See, around here when Jon pretended to join the Wildlings and like he was put into Tormund's crew, and then they climbed the wall together, but then they fought against each other at the Battle of the Wall, and Jon, defeated Tormund. These were enemies on either side of a battle, and then, Tormund had every expectation that he'd be executed by the Night's Watch and by Stannis. But then Jon spoke up for Tormund and freed him, and they went to Hardhome together, and that was sort of their bonding moment together when they were like rallying the free folk against the White Walkers together. And Jon was helping save Tormund's people, which is sort of his main motive. And so Jon was helping Tormund fulfill that. And he saved Tormund's people by bringing him beyond the wall. So it makes sense that Tormund would have a lot of loyalty and fondness for Jon, even though Jon totally betrayed him not so long ago. So that's an interesting relationship. Back to the episode. So yeah, Tormund and Jon hang out and it's fun, and yeah, Jon thought Tormund was dead because he was at Eastwatch when the wall came down, and Tormund and Beric and Ed tell Jon that the army of the dead has killed Last Hearth and they are marching close to Winterfell, which they would already know if they were using dragons to scout. Like, one of the whole benefits of having dragons in war in the books is that you can fly dragons all over the place really quickly to see, hey, enemy army over there. And if they used the dragons to scout where the White Walkers were, that would help. I mean, you guys are right that they could use those ice javelins and shoot down the dragons, I suppose. That would be a problem. But still, the dragons are the best hope of defeating the army of the dead. So, you got to use them one way or another. So yeah, we see this, the defenses coming up, and I'm not sure what the point of the catapult is. Maybe they're going to throw like flaming balls like they did before. Someone in the chat says that Bran would be using his ravens to scout. Yeah, you're right. That would be a much more smart thing to do. Bran should just walk into birds, fly them over the army of the dead, and know where they are. So yeah, why isn't Bran doing that? Why didn't Bran tell them that Last Hearth has already gone down? And I think that raises the sort of question again of why isn't Bran telling the good guys everything? Like, does Bran just not know exactly what's going on? Has he not had visions and dreams of the Night King? Has he not flown his birds over them? Or does he actually know, but he's just choosing not to reveal it for some sort of strategic Machiavellian destiny sort of reason? I don't know. So yeah, they have this war council. And yeah, I think possibly one of the more ridiculous lines. I know I'm harping on about this, but where is it? Well, Davos says the dragons will give us an edge in this fight. The dragons will give us here we are. The dragons should give us an edge in the field. We've seen dragons burn entire armies. They're more than an edge. They're the whole sword. Like, dragons are the nuclear weapons of Game of Thrones. The whole point is that they can just lay waste to whole armies. The dragons are more than an edge. That's silly. But apparently they're going to use the dragons to protect Bran. What? Dragons don't protect people. They blaze fire onto their enemies. Are they really going to have the dragons curled up in the Godswood next to Bran looking after him, babysitting the cripple while the battle's happening outside. Is that really what they're going to do with the dragons? That would be silly. I mean, I suppose we'll see. But I mean, the basic idea of putting Bran in the Godswood in order to lure the Night King to Bran, I suppose that makes sense. Because like, they're totally right that they need to kill the Night King. He's the leader of the White Walkers. They're hoping that if the Night King is killed, all the other White Walkers will fall, hopefully. But one way or another, the Night King is who you want to kill. So using Bran to lure him makes sense. And yeah, apparently, the motivation of the Night King is that, he wants to kill all life, but specifically he wants to kill Bran because Bran is the Three-Eyed Raven. And the Three-Eyed Raven represents memory of humanity. Like, the Three-Eyed Raven and the magic of the Weirwoods and the old gods, they store all these, like, visions and the souls of the dead, and this whole sort of ancient hive mind that remembers all the secrets of the ancient past. That's what the Night King wants to destroy. Because it makes sense that, the Night King was created by the Children of the Forest, and the Night King is angry that he was created, and that's, why he killed the children in Season 6, Episode 5, and that's why he killed Bloodraven. That's why he killed the previous Three-Eyed Raven. So that kind of makes sense to me, that the Night King wants to kill the Three-Eyed Raven. And all this stuff about memory. I mean, it is all a bit philosophical, like this idea that memory is what makes us human instead of animal, and so that's why memory is really important. That's why the Night King wants to kill him. The Night King's quite a philosopher, I think, if he reckons that it's so important that we destroy the memory of man. And also, couldn't the Night King just kill everyone, Bran included? Like, why does he specifically have to go out his way for Bran? If the Night King just kills everyone, Bran will die too, Like, why the Night King, if he was smart, you wouldn't think the Night King would have to risk himself to attack Bran. But yeah, I don't know. So they talk about the strategy, and Bran shows that the Night King's mark is still on him. So that was a really weird moment in Season 6 when, Bran in a vision got marked by the Night King. And everyone was like, well, what does that mean? What's the mark gonna do? Like, one of the ideas was that maybe if Bran goes through the wall with the mark, then the wall will fall down or something. That didn't happen, but I'm glad that the mark actually means something now. Apparently, it's like a GPS tracker that the Night King has put in Bran. He's tagged him like a cat, and now he knows where Bran is at all time. He's got Find My Friends turned on, and he can just tell where Bran is, and just call him up and say, "Hey, Brano, fancy an ice spear through your spine." That seems to be what that's about. And, I guess the question is, what will Bran do? I mean, maybe Bran will warg a dragon like Viserion. Maybe Bran will have a psychic battle in the astral plane against the Night King, just like they had those sort of shared visions before. Shit'll get interesting. So anyway, they're trying to lure out the Night King while the rest of the battle is a distraction. I mean, you can see how, it's almost as though it's television. They're really setting up this battle next episode for maximum drama. You can imagine how this is going to go down. People on the ground, Jorah and Grey Worm and Missandei and Jaime and Brienne and Tyrion and all these, and Tormund, all these warriors are going to be going at it, and Podrick. And they're going to be, desperately fighting for survival, while meanwhile cut to the Godswood where the Night King is coming in and trying to go after the Three-Eyed Raven, and then there's a dragon battle overhead between Viserion, the undead dragon, and the others, and then down in the crypts, something spooky might happen with the dead rising up, and then, that little girl from before will have to defend them, and, Sam's going to do something for Gilly, and, you can imagine how there's going to be, multiple crazy dramatic shit all happening at once in this battle. It's gonna be wild next episode, I'd say. Anyway, so yeah, they have this battle plan, and one of the other details is that they ask the question of, will Dragonfire kill the White Walkers? People are really enthusiastic in the comments of AltShiftX videos saying that, hey, fire can kill White Walkers, because, I always say that, Valyrian steel and dragonglass kills White Walkers. We've never actually seen fire kill a White Walker. We've seen fire kill whites, which are the zombies. We've never seen fire kill a White Walker. And so Bran points that out. He's like, well, we don't know whether dragons will be able to kill White Walkers. I've got a sneaking suspicion that they will. I reckon if a hot rock, if dragonglass can kill a White Walker, I reckon a dragon could. Which is why I still think it's so silly that in season 7, episode 6, Dany didn't just like crash land fire explosion like Charizard flamethrower move, just blow the Night King away. That would have been a good idea. But anyway, so we're gonna find out. I suspect we're gonna find out if fire can kill White Walkers. And Tormund just sort of leverages this as a way to go all eyebrows at Brienne. I don't suppose, like, do you think there's going to be some kind of payoff for Tormund's love for Brienne? Like, she's consistently rebuffed him, and if Brienne's going to hook up with anyone, it's surely got to be Jaime. But I wonder if there will be some kind of moment where Brienne's like, yo, Tormund, great bloke, love your beard, but sorry, I'm promised to another. Or if Tormund will end up with someone else. I don't know. Who are the other eligible bachelorettes in Winterfell at the moment? There aren't very many. And, Arya's just hooked up with Gendry, and Sansa's getting close to Theon, if anyone. I'm not sure. Will Tormund hook up with someone by the end? And then at the end of the War Council, Jon walks away from Daenerys again without sort of saying anything. So it's obvious that Jon is trying to avoid Daenerys, because Jon is trying to figure out, oh my god, how do I tell my girlfriend that she is my aunt? So that comes up later. Some people are shipping Tormund and Sansa in the chat now. They're both kissed by fire, so together they'd be a barbecue or something. All right, so then Tyrion has this scene with Bran that we talked about before, which I think is great, but mysterious, because Bran is this so incredibly mysterious, magical dude, and it's amazing that no one has sat down and said, yo, Brano, what's going on with you? What do you know? They should have said that a while ago. Thanks you for the super chat, Daniel Finlay, who says that, yeah, that girl with the burnt face, she is reminiscent of Shireen, isn't she? And I suppose of the Hound in a way, because the Hound's got that burnt face. This little girl here, she does look like Shireen, who had grayscale on her cheek. And the Hound also was burned. I wonder if this is meant to be like a proto-Hound. Like, the Hound was someone who, felt betrayed at an early age and turned to violence as a way to feel safe. I wonder if that's what this girl is going through. She's got a similar sort of conflict to the Hound. So the War Council happens, and Tyrion chats with Bran, and we have this scene where Missandei tries to make friends with some girls, and then the girls just sort of look all suspicious and walk away. Presumably because they're suspicious of, like, this foreigner. They've never seen someone who looks like Missandei before. They've never seen someone who didn't look like them. These are northerners who, probably live in some rural village out of the north where, the most foreign person they've ever seen is their third cousin. So they treat Missandei badly, and Missandei's sad that she's treated badly by these people of this other culture. And she's just saying, yo, like, Grey Worm, like, we're not very welcome here. I'll fight with Daenerys till the end, but I'd rather be somewhere else at the end of all this. I want a home that's somewhere else. And so Missandei says that she wants to go to Narth. And Narth is where Missandei originally came from, and it looks like this. Or at least that's an artist's impression. That's Benjamin Hurlwriggel. I don't know how to say the umlauts, but there's some lovely artwork of Narth here. And the interesting thing about Narth is that it's a peaceful island. It's a culture that doesn't know war, but slavers come from outside and try to take them because, a people who don't know war are ripe for the taking. Thus, human history. Man, that's profound. And the usual defense of Narth is that they've got these butterflies. It's called the Butterfly Island, I think. And these butterflies are the defense of Narth because they carry a disease, so that any foreign person who comes to Narth ends up killed by the butterfly plague. It doesn't affect the natives, but any foreigners get killed by the butterflies. So yeah, fun fact. And yeah, I think it's interesting with the Grey Worm Missandei thing. Like, they're acknowledging that racism is an issue. Like, in this medieval society, people aren't going to treat everyone the same when they look different and they're from foreign cultures. And I think it's good that they're, like, acknowledging that. But I do think it's funny that at the same time, they're just knighting Brienne. And it's like, well, okay, so racism is a problem, but apparently, like, patriarchy is just a non-issue now, because like, they have this ancient tradition of only men can be knights, and everyone's totally happy to just ignore that convention. Like, not everyone is Randall Tarley, not everyone is super sexist, but you'd think that like a fair number of people would still be thinking that, knighthood is a man's thing, and you're making fun of the institution of knighthood by making a woman a knight. Like there are people who wouldn't take Brienne as a knight seriously because of that patriarchal sexist deal, and they just ignore that here. But in the Missandei Grey Worm scene, they are acknowledging racism. So I don't know, they're sort of acknowledging those issues in some ways, but not in others. And another issue, like a similar issue, would be like the treatment of Tormund. Like, Tormund is a wildling, and the Northerners hate the wildlings because the wildlings have been invading them over the centuries and millennia. But that's not something that they've really acknowledged later. And I guess the answer is, they can't acknowledge everything, every little issue, every little tension. But they certainly emphasize this one with Grey Worm and Missandei. And of course, the fact that Grey Worm is making this promise of like, hey, we've got to, we're going to have a happily ever after. That's just setting up a death, isn't it? No one talks about their happily ever after with so much wistfulness unless it's going to end in tragedy. I think a lot of people agree that like either Grey Worm or Missandei have just got to die this season, probably next episode, because it's just ripe for tragedy, isn't it? Or maybe they'll get away with it, and maybe at the very end they'll go to Narth. I did see some like Reddit comment or someone who was saying like, oh, wouldn't it be tragic if Missandei dies and then Grey Worm brings her bones to Narth? That would be heartbreaking. I would QQ if Grey Worm brought Missandei's bones to Narth, like the bloody Starks bringing their bones up to the crypts. So we have a conversation. We have Ghost. Bloody Ghost turns up after all this time. This is Jon's direwolf who he picked up in season 1, and just has barely appeared ever since. It's messed up how little appearance Ghost has had in this series. I'm so happy he's returned. This was one of these early trailers where they had Ghost by Jon's side when he was represented as King of Winterfell. This is when they first met. This is when they went beyond the wall together. This is when they went to Craster's Keep. Like, Ghost and Jon have been like best buds for so long, and then he just didn't appear through like most of season 7 and 8. And so I'm so glad that he's turned up now. The loyalist doggo of all, standing by Jon's corpse, defending Jon's corpse. And then he didn't appear in season 7, and barely in season 6. Now he's back. So ain't that heartwarming? And I suppose it's not likely that Ghost is going to play much of a role in the battle, just because like if he hasn't been emphasized, or like he isn't even acknowledged in this scene. He's just standing in the background. So I don't suppose Ghost is likely to play a big role. Maybe Ghost will survive the series just by virtue of the showrunners not acknowledging him. Like, I doubt they're going to have a dramatic Ghost death on screen, given how little they've talked about him. Like they did with like Summer and whatever, but we'll have to see how it goes. There are all these interesting theories in the books about how Jon might warg into Ghost when he dies, because Jon is still dead in the books, because the books are like 3 seasons behind at this point. Because Jon is a warg in the books. Jon has the same power that Bran has to be able to skin change into his wolf. And, he's not, like, aware of it. He doesn't do it, like, consciously, but it's just this sort of background thing that happens in his dreams. Anyway, so we have this moment of the old Night's Watch guys. So Jon and Sam and Ed are hanging out. And then Jon suggests that, hey, Sam, like, maybe you shouldn't fight in this battle because you're not exactly the greatest warrior in the world. And Sam's like, well, I'm a legit warrior. I killed a White Walker. I killed a Thenn, because in the battle for the wall in season 4, Sam killed a Thenn warg with a crossbow, which was exciting. So Sam has done some cool stuff, but that said, he's not the most skilled combatant. Yeah, no, this is the most adorable bit that Sam's like, oh, my accomplishments. I've killed a White Walker. I've saved Gilly. I stole a considerable number of books from the Citadel Library. Like, that's one of his feats. That's one of his, like, most impressive, dangerous, martial things he's done is he's got some overdue books from the library still. So, Sam truly is badass. And yeah, I guess the question is, what will Sam do during the battle? Because yeah, like during the battle for the wall, he did like help reload Pip's crossbow, and he did some stuff like that. Like maybe he'll have a similar role in this series, but you'd think that Gilly has to be what Sam is worried about. So maybe he'll spend some time protecting Gilly during the battle, or protecting the library, protecting the books. And then Sam and John make fun of Ed for being a virgin. Which is a bit rich, given that, John and Sam swore to, take no wife, the implication being not have sex. And yet they're mocking Ed for being, haha, you kept your vows. You kept your sacred oath, you loser. But also, like, let's be real. Surely Ed went down to Molestown at some point. Because remember how the Night's Watchmen, they swear not to have sex, but like most of them do. They like go down to this brothel at the town of Molestown. So most of the Night's Watchmen fuck, even if they say they don't. And come on, Ed. Like, come on, Ed fucks. But anyway, so yeah, Ed's like, man, if Sam Tarly's making fun of me, you know something's going down. So we got a conversation between, and then we have this last shot of the Watchmen on the wall, and yeah, they say this is the last of us. They say now it's just us three. Are they implying that they are the last three members of the Night's Watch? Like, there hasn't really been any acknowledgement of what's happened to the Night's Watch. The Night's Watch is this 8,000-year-old institution that's been defending the wall since its inception, like this ancient sacred brotherhood. And they've had some rough times lately, what with the wildlings and the White Walkers and the Battle of the Bastards and John leaving and whatever. Are we ever going to talk about what happened to the rest of the Night's Watch? Did they all die? Are they dead? Or and are these guys the last ones left, or are they just saying the last three of our like friendship group at the wall? It's hard to tell. But in any case, it's sort of everyone is Night's Watchman now. Like now it's sort of like, this is what the Night's Watch was founded to do, protect the living from the dead, and that's what they're doing at Winterfell. So they're sort of more Night's Watch than ever before in some ways. So Tyrion and Jaime chat in front of the fire, and they sort of reminisce about the old days. And yet, Tyrion casually brings up Tywin, and Jaime seems chill with that. So apparently he's forgiven the whole father-killing patricide situation. And they talk about the people they used to be. Jaime used to be a proud golden lion, and Tyrion used to be a whoremonger. And Tyrion says that, well, whoremongering is no longer an issue for me. We had that scene in season 5 when Tyrion talks to a prostitute, and he wanted to solicit some prostitution, as they say, and he couldn't. Like, the prostitute was like, yeah, let's go at it, and he was like, I can't. And I think the implication is that Tyrion is really torn up still about the death of Shae. And Shae was this quote-unquote whore who fed into all these like complex issues of like shame and daddy issues and women issues that Tyrion and Tywin both have. And I think that's sort of the reason why Tyrion doesn't use prostitutes anymore, is that it's too tied up in his like grief for Shae and his anger at Tywin and all of that stuff. But Tyrion also sort of frames it in a better way. He talks about self-betterment. He says that it's because he wants to be a better man that he's not having sex with prostitutes anymore. And I think many would argue that you can be a good person and have sex with prostitutes. I'm sure people would object to that, or some would, but Tyrion's saying, I suppose, that, I used to be this, like, drunk, lecherous imp, and now I'm trying to focus on making the world better. He's trying to focus on helping Daenerys, and that's sort of why he's not spending his days gambling and prostituting like he used to. So that's what's going on there, I think. And also another layer is that Tyrion is in love with Daenerys on some level. Part of the reason why he was staring at Daenerys while she was boat sexing Jon was because Tyrion has some affection for her. There was an interview with Peter Dinklage where he was like, "Yo, like Tyrion is in love with Daenerys, or at least thinks he is." So I think that'll continue to be an issue, part of what bonds Tyrion to Daenerys. So then we have this fireside chat with all of the warriors on the night of the battle, their last night on Earth, all getting together to prepare for death. They all sort of expect to die in this battle. And you do what you do before a battle or a big meeting or a uncomfortable wedding. You drink with your friends. Balls. See, I told you. Balls come up in almost every episode these days. I swear there was not as much BPE, balls per episode, in previous seasons as there are now. This is high BPE. Lots of balls talk. Anyway, so yeah, Tormund hits on Brienne again, and Tormund has brought his horn full of milk. We get this lovely story of Tormund's claim to have killed a ball, to have killed a giant and suckled at a giantess's teat, and so on, which is sort of similar to his story of a bear when he claims to have laid with a bear. Tormund in the books is this very sort of jolly, funny guy. Like Tormund in the show is weird because at the very start Tormund was played like almost completely straight. Like Tormund was just like this tough, scary barbarian warrior in like season 3. And now Tormund is like almost entirely comic relief. Which, I would have liked if they did a bit of both throughout the series instead, because that's what the book Tormund does. Like the book Tormund always had this like jolly, ridiculous side, making up these stories and claiming that his member is like one of the great book Tormund stories is that he claims that a bear bit off half his penis, but he claims that his penis, even with it bit in half, is still twice as long as any other man's. So there's lots of these like funny, ridiculous like Tormund stuff, but at the same time, throughout Tormund's arc, he has this really tragic side, talking about how his sons were killed by White Walkers and came back as whites, and Tormund had to kill his own undead children, and he has this really like deep, mournful grief side. Which is partly what's motivating him, in his fight to protect the wildlings. And I think that's another thing that's missing from here is that we haven't had the other miscellaneous wildlings acknowledged in the last couple of episodes. Like, Tormund's motivation is to defend his people. There are thousands of wildlings who Jon let through the wall. Where are they now? Like, we saw a couple of extras in the background. So, I think we're seeing wildlings fight alongside the rest of Westeros against the dead. But I'd like to see Tormund have a scene with some other wildlings, just saying like, yo, like, we're going to get through this. I'm fighting for my people. That gives Tormund some emotional stakes, which I think is important. And yeah, it's kind of funny that Tormund calls Jaime King Killer instead of Kingslayer, just like Jaime said, just like Tormund said dog instead of hound to Jaime Lannister. So it looks like there's a bit of Chinese whispers that happens across the wall, and a little bit of cultural miscommunication on exact nicknames. So anyway, yeah, Tormund tells his story and he drinks his milk down his beard, and Davos decides that he needs a drink as a result. And yeah, I also would like a little more acknowledgement of like the fact that, yeah, Tormund is this wildling, and wildlings are not accepted in the Seven Kingdoms mostly, but everyone seems to have gotten over that at this point. So the Hound, meanwhile, while everyone's hanging out and having a good time and bonding, the Hound is in this self-imposed exile out on the walls, because the Hound may be a more noble character. He's fighting for the good guys out of the goodness of his heart for the first time. But the Hound still feels alienated from everyone else. He still feels bitter, and he still feels misunderstood, and so that's why he's out here getting drunk on his own instead of hanging out. But Arya, the other sort of misunderstood, alienated character, comes and chats with him. And they have this, this sort of adorable, it's almost like a sibling relationship in the way that Hound and the Arya just sort of spar with each other and just sort of play fight with each other in a way that is just showing their affection. Like they're constantly pretending to be annoyed by each other and constantly insulting each other, but they're only doing it because they're only doing this because they they don't want to say I love you. They don't want, they're not able to express their emotions directly and honestly, so they're just showing, you're such an old bloody cunt, you're such blah blah blah. So that's nice. And Arya's pointing out, like, you're fighting for the good guys now. And the Hound says, well, I fought for you, didn't I? So that was, in season 4 when the Hound was protecting Arya, there was that great line against Brienne where the Hound's like, I'm protecting her. That's what I'm doing. So the Hound is sort of owning that, and he's saying that, yeah, like I did feel for you, and I was doing something altruistic. And then Beric comes along. And Beric is the bloke from the Brotherhood Without Banners who's died and been reborn 6 times. And yeah, Beric was on Arya's list because Beric sold Gendry to Melisandre in season 3. But Arya seems to have forgiven that now. And so they hang out, and Beric starts to try and do a bit of a prayer, a bit of preaching about the Lord of Light. This is his moment, he says, which is an interesting line. He says that this war, this stuff that's going on, is the Lord of Light's moment. I didn't know gods had moments, but apparently this is one of them. Because this is, light against dark. Like, Melisandre talked a lot about the sort of philosophy of this religion of Relorism, and it's about this dualism between dark and light, which is basically the real-world religion of Zoroastrianism, is where that's basically lifted from. But Beric's saying that this is like the apotheosis of that battle between light and dark. This is what's going on. Next episode is good versus evil 2019. #####. So, and yeah, the Hound responds with his classic cynicism to Beric's religion. But despite his words, the Hound is doing what Beric wants him to do, what the Lord of Light wants him to do. So, willingly or not, he is serving the Lord of Light. And then Arya goes off and practices her archery, and she's apparently also a dead-eye, perfectly accurate archer as well. I think there is such a thing as overpowered. Like, Arya is not only, like, a master of stealth, a master of throwing dragon glass daggers, a master of archery, a master of assassination. She can play the game of faces, she can detect lies, she can spin a staff around, she can recover from stab wounds in Bravos, she can fight in the dark, the list of Arya's feats is, long. And I think there's a risk of having a character become so powerful that it's just like you don't ever think she's gonna fail. But we did see that thing in the trailer where Arya was looking terrified and afraid, and I suppose that's the payoff. Like, you build Arya up to be this like unstoppable monster, but then when she gets beaten and terrified, then we're like, holy shit, like this is some real opposition that she's coming up against. So yeah, she's showing off her archery, and then Gendry delivers the weapon that Arya requested. Arya forgets to say thank you. She's a bit impolite. But she says this will work. She's happy with her spear. And Gendry talks about how Arya in season 3 was saying, yo, Gendry, you should come to Winterfell. You should be the smith in Winterfell. Because Arya at that time was trying to build a family. She wanted people she could trust. And yet Gendry left her and decided to stay with the Brotherhood. And then got bought by Melisandre. So I think it's interesting how, Gendry was this person who could have been Arya's family, but sort of never is. And even when they have sex here, this is sex that's more about, desire and sex for sex's sake than, this is not, an expression of romance between Arya and Gendry. They like each other, but, they don't have a romantic relationship as such. So I think it's interesting that they're sort of talking about how, remember when we sort of used to be becoming a family, and now we're sort of not. I think it sort of represents a missed opportunity for Arya, which is sort of why Arya is the one who's out with these miserable old shits on the wall instead of inside with the actual mates who are having a good time drinking. So Arya still has a certain amount of alienation, I think. But anyway, so Arya's like, you want some fuck? Well, actually, no, it's a bit weird because Gendry's like, oh, well, Melisandre wanted my blood for a spell, and she stripped me. And then Arya's like, was that the first time you'd been with a woman? And I'm not sure how Arya made the jump from Gendry had leeches on him with Melisandre to Gendry had sex with Melisandre. Why is that what she assumed happened? But also, Gendry's like, yo, I'm a king's bastard, and Arya's like, huh. Arya's eyebrows go up when Gendry says I'm a king's bastard. So, Arya has taste. She's not smanging the common rabble. So yeah, they're pretty. There's some tension that builds up, and yeah, this is interesting. So like in the same way that Arya was saying in that previous scene with Gendry, Arya was saying like, "Have you killed the zombies? Like, how many people have you killed? Like show me your credentials for killing." And then now Arya's saying like, "How many people have you had sex with? Like, show me your sexing stats. What's your KD? Like are you like how many people have you had sex with? Are you worthy? Are you a competent lover?" She's like testing him and asking him, demanding him to prove himself. In the same way that before she was saying, "Well, how good of a fighter are you?" So before they were discussing death, and now they're discussing life. And so and Arya sees through Gendry's lie, saying that he doesn't count. Everyone counts. And Arya's like, "Well, this is the last night on Earth. I've done a lot of killing. I want to know what having sex is like before I die." So they go at it, and which shots can I show? So Arya is very much the dominant one in this interaction, which is something you don't see very often. The woman being assertive in sex. That's cool to see. And interestingly, Arya has these scars on her side, which I'm not sure what that came from. Like she was stabbed in Bravos in season 6 by the waif, but like that was more in the belly. I don't know where these scars came from. I don't know if anyone in the chat knows where that came from. But yeah, they have sex, and a good time was had by all, as far as I can tell. Although Aya does say, "I'm not the red woman. You can take your own bloody pants off." So it's Aya's being dominant here, but not coercive like Melisandre was. So we have a scene with the people drinking around the fire again, and Tyrion reflects on how we all used to be sort of enemies at various points, but now we've gotten together. We're on the side of the good guys. And it's kind of inspiring how, you'd think that Game of Thrones is a story where the bad guys win. Like, that's kind of the point that they were making when Ned Stark got executed in season 1. Like sort of the point of the story is, like, it's a balance between, like, nobility and honor and honesty against, like, Machiavellian evil-doing in order to get ahead. And yet here we are with mostly the good people, the honorable people, the honest people. These are the people who've survived, largely. I mean, Jaime is a recent convert to that particular side, but otherwise, it's surprising that it's sort of this alliance of the do-gooders who have lasted till the end. And meanwhile, it's only really like Cersei and Qyburn and Euron who are the more villainous survivors. And yeah, thanks for all the super chats. I will go through the super chats once we've done this sort of pass through the episode. So I reckon 15 minutes we'll have summarized the episode, and then we can then I'll work through these super chats. Yeah, these are the survivors. Tyrion survived the Blackwater, Davos survived the Blackwater and the Battle of the Bastards. Jaime Lannister, like one of the interesting things about Jaime is that despite his like fame as one of the most skilled warriors in the world, he hasn't actually fought in many big battles. He did fight in the Siege of Pike, but I don't think that was really like, I think that was when he was knighted, I think. But like Jaime isn't usually noted for like great accomplishments at the Siege of Pike, as far as I know. And since the Siege of Pike, he hasn't really done shit. Like, that was sort of part of the point of his page in the White Book, where, it's meant to list the accomplishments of Kingsguard. And Jaime doesn't have a very long list of accomplishments. And, Jaime notes that he lost the Battle of the Whispering Wood to Robb. So, part of what this upcoming battle is about for Jaime, I think, is that he will get to fight in a big, important battle, and he will get to prove himself. But this time, he doesn't have the advantages that he had before in terms of having two hands. And then, so yeah, we have the knighting of Brienne, and I think it's so lovely that, the way it comes about is Tormund saying, like, hang on a minute, you bloody Southerners. You're not gonna knight this badass woman Brienne, this powerful, strong warrior. Like, why in the hell not? And they're like, well, we've just got this patriarchal tradition. And then Tormund's like, well, fuck that, because as a wildling, as a man from the free folk, there's no way the free folk would want to be bound by those sorts of rules. In the free folk, like, there's this tradition of spear wives, of wildling warrior women. Like, if you can use a spear, then you bloody well should. they're not as bound by those kinds of conventions. So I think it's nice how like the wildling philosophy is what gets Brienne knighted. And Brienne has a bit of sour grapes here, but obviously Brienne wants to be a knight because she is so knightly and she is so honorable, and like that's the set of values by which she served Renly and Catelyn, and how she sort of defined herself in her code of honor and her ethics. Like she has been a better knight than anyone else, despite not being a knight until now. So that's exciting. And Jaime does the knighting himself, which is this great expression of trust. We've already talked about this scene a bit. But yeah, all these values of bravery, protecting the innocent, being just, all these values of a knight is exactly what Brienne's been doing for all of her arc. So she finally gets this happy moment of not only like being confident in herself and who she is, but being acknowledged by everyone else. Like they all clap and cheer her and stuff, which is this lovely moment of Brienne finally getting the respect and the acknowledgement that she's always wanted and that she's never gotten before. So that's really lovely, seeing Brienne beaming like that. And then we have a scene with Jorah and Sam, and so they talk about Jeor Mormont, who is Jorah's father. Let me pull up Jeor Mormont. He was a really important figure to Sam because Sam was rejected by his own father, Randall, and he was told to go join the Wall. And at the Wall, Jeor became sort of like a surrogate father to Sam. I mean, we didn't actually get many scenes with Sam and Jeor. We more got like Jeor and Jon. Jeor was definitely a father figure to Jon. But the point is that this man was a father figure to Jon and Sam, and yet his relationship with Jorah was very strange. Jeor is Jorah's father, and Jeor rejected Jorah for having fled the country and having dishonored the family by selling slaves and all of that stuff. So Jeor was a father to both of these men in different ways, and Sam gives his family sword, his father's sword, to Jorah to fight with in the battle. So they're upholding Sam's father's sword in the honor of Jeor's sword, in the honor of Jorah's father, which I don't know. I that's about celebrating good dads as opposed to the dads you're born with. I suppose like this is sort of Sam rejecting Randall and embracing Jorah's father in some ways. And Jorah takes up the sword and wields it in the memory of his father. So that's a nice sort of redemption for Jorah. And we have a song by Podrick. Podrick sings Jenny's song, and we talked about Jenny's song already. Jenny was this Jenny of Oldstones was this common woman who claims to be descended from the children of the forest, and Duncan Targaryen gave up his crown to be with her. Which I think could connect to Daenerys and Jon, and the idea of Daenerys giving up her crown or Jon giving up his claim on the throne. Could be interesting. And then we have this sort of montage jumping between a few different people. So Sam and Gilly with their adopted child, little Sam. Well, Gilly's child, but not Sam's child. And Theon and Sansa. It's interesting. I wonder if their relationship will get more close. Like they're quite sort of intimate here. I wonder if their bond will deepen in this series. And yeah, we got this interesting shot with Arya and Gendry post coitus, and Arya's looking like quite sort of sad and isolated. Like Gendry's asleep. And Arya looks very sort of alone despite being with Gendry. She doesn't look, happy and satisfied. It's not like she was with Pod the God. She looks a bit sort of sad. And I wonder if this sort of represents, I don't know, like a sort of a failing of Arya's attempt at intimacy. And it's a failing for Arya to find the sort of love and light that she wants. Yeah, that's interesting with Arya. Because I think the vibe with Arya is that like the trauma that she's been through and like the stuff that's happened and the things that she's done has sort of separated her from human intimacy, and so I wonder if that's sort of what this is representing. So then we have Grey Worm and Missandei as well, who also are these lovers who look destined to be cleft in twain, literally and metaphorically. Jorah never wanted to leave. So these lyrics here are very much about, these loving relationships that are going to be tragically broken up. It's a mournful song. Jenny's song is a sad, mournful song. It's about loss. It's about lost love. And I think this episode is all about setting up the love and showing the love that's about to be lost. I think that's what's happening. And then we finally have this long-awaited scene of Jon telling Daenerys, "Hey, you're my aunt." So conveniently enough, we have Lyanna's statue, this wonderful tool of exposition. It's so convenient that these dead characters who aren't around anymore, we have these convenient statues to give characters the opportunity to talk about them. I guess in modern movies they mostly have to use like photos and flashbacks and things, but here we have these lovely statues. And they talk about the old story that, Rhaegar supposedly kidnapped and raped Lyanna, but then Jon's like, well, no, they actually got married in secret, and they had a kid, and that kid is me, and my name is Aegon Targaryen, and I have a claim on the throne. And Daenerys is sort of incredulous at first, but Jon's like, well, it's true, and then Daenerys is like, well, hang on a minute, that makes you heir to the throne ahead of me. And that's a big-ass problem for Daenerys, because her whole goal is to be Queen of the Seven Kingdoms on the Iron Throne. And again, they could solve this problem by getting married. Jon could be king, Daenerys could be queen, they could rule together. But of course, Daenerys never wanted to rule with anyone. She wanted to be the queen. She wanted to be in charge. And she'd have to compromise in order to make Jon like co-ruler. I'm sure Jon wouldn't mind if Daenerys ruled and he was just sort of the side bitch. If he was just sort of king in name but not in actuality, I think that would sort of work, honestly. Jon doesn't want to rule. So you'd really think that marriage would be the solution here. But just when things are getting spicy, the horn blows and they're like, well, the bad guys are coming. White Walkers at the gates. And, this shot I think is quite powerful. The fact that it's Jon, Daenerys, and Tyrion, the three main characters standing together, facing the darkness at the end of this episode. Like the books are so far from this happening. Like for book readers to see this is pretty crazy. For the three main characters who have had such separate, distant, different journeys, for them to all be united here together against the dark is pretty powerful. And then there's a sort of like Jon nods to Daenerys and then she goes off, which I suppose might mean that, hey, it's time to break out the dragons, which again, I think they should have done before, but they have that nod and then Tyrion and it pans back and then we get this whole line of White Walkers and it looks like there's a lot of White Walkers. Like, it's really hard to tell. It's really dark and blurry. But it looks like this line of White Walkers extends into the distance, like a long way. Like, we saw the silhouettes of, 12 White Walkers before. So it seems as though there's at least 12 White Walkers. But this looks like it might be even more than 12 White Walkers. How many White Walkers are there? I mean, we do know that the White Walkers have been making more White Walkers by converting babies. Like, Craster has been giving children to the White Walkers. Was it 50 or 100? There was some number of babies who Craster gave to the White Walkers. Yeah, Craster PogChamp, someone says in the chat. Because Craster is single-handedly responsible for creating a whole bunch of these White Walkers by giving them his babies. So they could be in the books at least, it's hinted that wildlings as well, like some of the weird subcultures of wildlings in the far, far north might also have been giving their babies. Like, it's unlikely that Craster was the only guy giving babies to White Walkers, given that he was so far south, and his sacrifice of babies was how he made peace with the White Walkers and stuff. So you'd think that other people would be doing it too. Point being, it seems totally plausible that there are lots of White Walkers. And again, White Walkers are different to the Whites. These White Walkers are the icy demon people. The Whites are the zombies, the army of the dead. And we've never seen more than 12 White Walkers max. So it's pretty scary for them to be a lot of them. And one of the interesting other things about this shot is that there's no Night King. There's no Viserion. Where's the Night King? Where's his dragon? There has been an interesting idea floating around on Reddit of hey, what if the Night King and Viserion isn't in this army, isn't attacking Winterfell, but is actually flying south and is attacking King's Landing at the same time that the White Walkers are attacking Winterfell. Of course, they did say in this scene they expected the Night King to go after Bran instead. But then in the inside the episode, they were talking about how that's what the good guys are expecting, but that might be different to what actually happens. So I don't know. Maybe that Reddit person is right, and the Night King is going to go burn the Red Keep while the Battle of Winterfell happens in the north. So yeah, what an episode. Oh, I think we did skip over Lyanna Mormont. Where was that scene? Well, yeah, there was also a scene with Lyanna Mormont and Jorah Mormont. Lyanna Mormont calls Jorah cousin, and that confuses me a little bit. I mistakenly said that Jorah was Lyanna's uncle in a previous video. I think it's actually grand uncle in actuality in the books, but Lyanna says cousin here. Maybe they're just using cousin in the sense of like, you know, in any sort of semi-distant relative, you can just sort of call cuz and get away with it. The exact relationship doesn't matter. The point is that they are related, and Lyanna is fighting in the battle despite Jorah's concerns. And Jorah doesn't really have any right to tell Lyanna what to do because Jorah's in exile and Lyanna's been running shit, so that sort of makes sense. So yeah, that is Season 8, Episode 2. Alright, so now what we're going to do is try and catch up on some of these super chats that we missed. Lots of questions were added here, so let's have a look through them. So yeah, this is a Q&A in name. What we've done is we've just done a big summary of the whole episode. Now let's answer some questions. So let me scroll to where the questions start. SH Nata says, does anyone else think they might actually lose the Battle of Winterfell? Yeah, well, we had that Aftermath trailer where it was showing all of the like can I pull that up real easy? They had the Aftermath trailer where they were showing us all these like artifacts of each of the characters in Winterfell with all of the people like apparently gone. Yeah, here we are, Aftermath. So we saw Bran's wheelchair, and Tyrion's Hand of the King pin, and Daenerys's dragon chain, and then we saw this figure of the Night King standing at the gates of Winterfell. So, like, the Game of Thrones showrunners are telling us, hey, look, wouldn't it be fucked up if the good guys lost the battle? And it would seem really weird to me if the trailer said, hey, the good guys are going to lose, and then the good guys lost like it says in the trailer. Like, wouldn't that be wild? Why would they give away the outcome of the biggest battle in the season of the series? Like, this is apparently like the longest and most intense and most expensive battle scene that's ever been filmed for television in any show. Why would they reveal the ending of it? So I'm quite puzzled by this even like existing as a trailer. Needle eye is sword here. But I mean, at the same time, it would be weird if they won the battle, because if they killed the Night King and defeated the White Walkers in episode 3, what would they do in the next 3 episodes? Deal with Cersei, I guess? Maybe. But like the White Walkers, the War for the Dawn, like seems to be the central climactic battle of the whole thing. So like you'd think that it would at least be episode 5 or 6 when the Night King is defeated. I think the most likely outcome is that they do lose the battle for Winterfell. Like both sides lose a lot. But many of the characters survive and go south. And then the final confrontation is at King's Landing or at the Trident. That I think would make sense. So thanks for the super chat, Aaron Herbst and Nonsensical Lexus. Yeah, we talked about Jenny's song. Thank you, Jason Rattray. Jason Rattray says, will the Night's King be attacking King's Landing or will he be at Winterfell? Yeah, so that's what we're saying. Like, maybe he'll actually go to King's Landing while everything else is happening at Winterfell. But then again, like they spent all that time in the episode saying, hey, the Night King wants to kill Bran. And, that makes sense because, we saw the Night King go after the previous Three-Eyed Raven. So it like that definitely had a vibe of like a personal grudge in season 6 when the Night King killed the previous Three-Eyed Raven. So like, given that, I think it would make sense for the Night King to go after Bran personally. Thanks, Pietro. Thanks, Eric. What an epi, boys. Thank you, Cold Shots, Kim Z24, Halter Ferguson Financial, who says that episode 3 will be brutal. Thank you, George. Thanks for your work. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Anuska. Thank you, Nolan. Thank you, Matthew Kenny. Matthew asks about Dany's reaction to the Aegon reveal. Yeah, so she's not happy about Jon having a claim to the throne. And that could be a point of conflict, but like I doubt that it's going to get serious. Like Jon and Daenerys do love each other, and there's always the prospect of marriage. It certainly hurts Daenerys in terms of like she thought she was the last Targaryen, and her whole identity was based on her Targaryen claim to the throne, and so she's got to sort of reconfigure her whole identity now that she's got another Targaryen out there. She had that relationship with Viserys, who was like the other Targaryen she knew, and that didn't end well. So she's got a lot to adjust to with Jon being a Targaryen now. Thanks, Tim Remington. Thank you, Magishka, Dagmay. Jack Frampton says Jaime is objectively the best character in this. Yeah, this episode was about Jaime in a lot of ways, I think. We always think about which character to put in the thumbnail of Alt Shift X videos, and we try and pick whichever character was the most sort of significant or central in the episode. I think Jaime will be the character in the thumbnail for the Season 8 Episode 2 Explained video. Thanks, How Internet. Yeah, the Knighting of Brienne was beautiful indeed. The Wolf Down Under says, R.I.P. to my boy Theon. He will die protecting Bran. He's the final redemption for House Stark. And glad we saw Ghost. Yeah, I could see Theon dying to protect Bran. I mean, yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Because, like, Theon's, like, central failure, the thing that really haunts him is the fact that he betrayed the Starks, the family who raised him. And Bran was the person who Theon, captured and manipulated and wronged in the first place. So I think it's appropriate for Theon to die protecting Bran. I think the unfortunate thing about that is that I don't think Bran is likely to show much appreciation for it, is he? Bran hasn't been overly effusive emotionally lately. And it would be a bit of a downer if Theon, like, died sacrificing himself to Bran and getting no thanks from Bran, So maybe Bran will start to show humanity again, like at the death of Theon or something. That would be cool. Or maybe this is just wishful thinking from me, thinking that Bran will ever be human again. But I hope we see that. Thank you, D. Westerfield. Thank you, Hairless Oyster. Have fun, be well, stay hydrated. Oyster says, Woofles is back, says Bless the Quinn. It is nice to see Ghost again. Thank you, Celis. Thank you, John PB. Mark Bonner says, where is Melisandre? So Melisandre went east to Volantis last season, but she said she would return. And I think the likely outcome is that she'll come back with a bunch of red priests or like R'hlloric soldiers from Essos, like fiery soldiers who will fight for the good guys. Maybe it'll be like Gandalf at Helm's Deep. Like maybe everything will seem lost at the end of the episode, but then Melisandre and her fiery soldiers will ride in and save the day. I think that would make sense. Torre says that Bran might warg into Viserion. Yeah, I think that's quite possible. Thanks, DA. Feedback says, do you think that Giant's Milk was good? I hope that wasn't Giant's Milk that Tormund had in his horn in this episode, because that would be very old, very off Giant's Milk. Can we also just, like, pour one out for, pour some Giant's Milk out for the giants, who are now extinct as a species, apparently. Like, Wun is dead, killed by Ramsay Bolton, and Mag the Mighty is dead. That was the last of their species, as far as we know. Although there are giants in the Army of the Dead. Undead giants fighting for the bad guys, so that is terrifying. Thank you, Prothak and Dapper Dave. Dapper Dave says that Varys is Cersei's spy. I don't think Varys is Cersei's spy, because Varys is committed to supporting whatever ruler is best for the people of Westeros. And Cersei is not that ruler. I think the showrunners don't know what to do with Varys, because Varys' motivation in the books is this whole complex thing built around this kid called Young Griff and this whole Blackfire conspiracy, which just doesn't exist in the show. So I think Varys is sort of a weird loose end that they're just gonna, I don't know, have Daenerys burn or something. I don't know what they're going to do with Varys. Dapper Dave also suggests that maybe Arya will use her weapon on a dragon. That would make sense. I mean, I would guess that Dragonglass would probably be effective at hurting Viserion, the undead dragon. And yeah, maybe Arya could use it on Viserion. Maybe they should be putting some dragonglass on a scorpion catapult thing so that they can kill Viserion. But I guess the most likely outcome is Viserion killed by the other two dragons. Maybe he'll be vulnerable to fire. Thank you, Veritas. Thank you, Decoy, who says Bobs. Rufuscent Eagle says that Sam is Azor Ahai. He kills White Gilly with Heartsbane. Ooh. So the story of Nissa Nissa is a legend about Azor Ahai, where supposedly the original Azor Ahai killed his beloved wife by stabbing her with a sword, and that sword became Lightbringer, the fiery weapon that ended the Long Night. And some people are like, oh, Jon is Azor Ahai, and he'll stab Daenerys. And some people are like, Jaime is Azor Ahai, and he'll stab Cersei. It can be both. Like, I think multiple people can, like, repeat that symbolic thing. Because the whole thing about, like, Nissa Nissa and Azor Ahai is that it happened before, you know? So it's about repetition. It's about this symbolism happening multiple times. I don't think Sam will kill Zombie Gilly, though, just because that would be too upsetting to even contemplate. Nick Smith says, will Arya be more afraid of death now? Well, Arya certainly looked afraid in that trailer, didn't she? For like the first time ever, we've seen Arya truly spooked. So yeah, Arya's extreme confidence, I suppose, might be tempered somewhat once she's actually faced the dead. Thank you, Brian Decker. Thank you, PJ. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Zarf. Thank you, Muhammad. I believe that Daenerys is going to kill Jon after winning the Night King's battle, and the story will repeat itself with a new Mad Queen. Yeah, so there's this idea of, like, will Daenerys become a tyrannical villain? And I think that, like, certainly, like, part of the whole internal conflict with Daenerys is, like, a balance between violence and aggression and peace and compromise. Like definitely that balance is, like, part of the point of Daenerys. But I don't think it's going to end with her becoming a villain. I don't think she'll become full bad guy. Just because it wouldn't feel like a good payoff to, like, her seasons and seasons of working to be a good leader. I think that it'll end tragically for Daenerys. I think she'll probably die, but I don't think she'll end, like, on the Iron Throne laughing as she, like, you know, makes a barbecue of her enemies. Because, you know, we've sort of already seen that as well. Like, in season 5, like, everyone forgets this, but in season 5, Daenerys went down into the basement of Meereen. She brought a bunch of slave masters of Meereen, and she fed them to her dragons because she thought that maybe one of them was supporting the Sons of the Harpy, but she didn't know which one, so she just, like, I'll just let my dragons decide. Like, Daenerys has already played the role of the Mad Queen. She's already burned innocent men. Like, Daenerys has already you know, nailed people to crosses. Daenerys has already done horrible things, and she's learned from it, and now she doesn't do that stuff anymore so much. I mean, she still burned the Tarleys and stuff, so, you know, this is still a conflict in her. But I don't think Daenerys is going to go mad and start killing people, if that's what you're asking. Metal Bat says, if they get married, someone's still going to have to wear the pants. Is there a precedent for co-equal monarchs in Westeros? That's a good question. I don't believe there is a precedent for co-equal monarchs. There was King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, who are sort of famed as, like, the most like good, decent, reasonable rulers, Targaryen rulers in history. And that was in large part due to Queen Alysanne. She, like, talked to the common people, and she made a bunch of reforms. And that was a relationship of like mutual power and mutual respect. It wasn't equal. It was still patriarchal. The king was still in charge. But Alysanne certainly held a lot of influence, and that's explored in the Fire and Blood history book that recently came out. So yeah, I think you could see that as a precedent for Jon and Daenerys ruling together. However, I don't think that the ending of the series will be Jon and Daenerys working together. I think that it's got to end in tragedy and sacrifice. Thank you, Dr. Val. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Suniva. Suniva said that it felt like Bran said that Jaime would die. Yeah, so there was that line where where Bran was like, "What makes you think there's an afterwards?" Which, yeah, maybe that's foreshadowing Jaime's death. Like, I thought that was sort of saying maybe we'll lose this war entirely. But I mean, that seems a bit ridiculous. Like, surely Bran expects the war to be won, because why else is he, bothering with any of this? Yeah, how do you know there isn't afterwards? I think there's a definite possibility of Jaime dying in this battle in Brienne's arms, because Jaime said, "I want to die in the arms of the woman I love," and that could mean Cersei, but it could mean Brienne. So maybe that'll be the end for Jaime next episode. Carl says, "Do you think Dany will muck things up next episode?" No. I think that Dany is going to be... There's going to be some tension with Jon because of the R+L=J, Jon's parentage revelation. But I think Dany will be absolutely fighting for the living next season. But she is also going to have to run away at some point. Like there was a shot in the trailer of Daenerys and Jon at Dragonstone, which means that they leave Winterfell at some point, which I guess we knew, but yeah, this might not go well for those guys. Thank you, Joe, who says Game of Thrones would not be the same without your videos. Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks, Jared and Jericho and Rob's Films. Rob Films says, when Winterfell falls, how will they escape? Well, that's a good point. I mean, just logistically, it's pretty difficult to get thousands of people south. My suspicion is that most of those thousands of people will be killed by the White Walkers. They could use dragons to ferry the important characters to Dragonstone, and they could probably use Yara Greyjoy's ships to transport whoever else survives. But we could see something really dark, like all those thousands of, kids and soldiers and Unsullied. Maybe they'll all die, and the real showdown will be at King's Landing in the later episodes. I think that would make sense. Raphael says, do you think Jon was testing Dany, talking about the new information about his parentage? I think Jon was telling Daenerys the truth. I mean, Jon's whole vibe is that he's this super honest, he's got integrity, he wants to just do the right thing, and I think that's why he was telling Daenerys the truth. But yeah, like, Daenerys certainly really focused on the whole Iron Throne aspect with that information. She didn't seem concerned about the fact that she was banging her nephew. She was more concerned about the succession. So yeah, that definitely tells you where Daenerys' priorities are. Although, of course, Daenerys is not necessarily concerned about incest, because she's a Targaryen, and the Targaryens have been banging their siblings forever. So, Mr. Miki, thank you, Matea. Matea says, why are the crypts considered so safe? Well, they're at the heart of Winterfell, they're underground, but also the crypts, like symbolically and magically seem to have been built as a defense against White Walkers. Like the crypts have these statues that are holding iron swords, and iron is apparently repellent to White Walkers, is sort of hinted at. The crypts just seem like this magical, ancient, special place. Like, the crypts were built at the very beginning of Winterfell's foundation. And Winterfell, people speculate, was built, like, at the end of the previous War for the Dawn, when the White Walkers were defeated the first time. So the whole institution of House Stark and Winterfell, it's all centered around the crypts. And that seems like a natural place to as a sanctuary against the White Walkers. But of course, there's also the possibility that maybe the dead will rise from the crypts or something. Because there's a lot of hints of that in the book, so could get wild. Kumpf 2492 says, why did Sam give up his family sword? Because if he tried to use it, he'd cut himself in half. Sam is not good with a sword, and that is a big-ass sword. Like, that's a two-handed greatsword. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that Sam doesn't try to wield that himself. It makes sense that he gives it to Jorah. Matthew Kenny says, any thoughts on who will escape Winterfell? Well, Jon and Daenerys, because in the trailer we saw them at Dragonstone. Tyrion, I think, like, Tyrion might die, but I don't think he'll die at Winterfell, because, Tyrion's arc isn't about the dead. Tyrion's arc is about his family, and people and human relationships. So I think Tyrion will survive. Grey Worm and Missandei, I reckon one of them will die. Jorah might die. Theon might die protecting Bran. Maybe Bran will die. It would be interesting if Bran, like, did some sort of magical weirwood thing and like, walked into a dragon. Did anyone let's drop some Animorphs knowledge. This guy Tobias in Animorphs, he was a warg basically. He was a weirdo outsider warg, and he warged into a bird and he stayed in the bird. So what if Bran wargs into a dragon and stays in the dragon? He loses his body and Bran becomes a soul and a spirit inside an animal. There you go. That would be cool. That would be fun. Because that's a thing that can happen. Like, that's something that Bran was warned against. If you warg into an animal and you stay there for too long, you'll be trapped inside. So maybe Bran will become a dragon boy and stay that way. Or a raven boy. That would be cool. Alessandro says, did Bran just tell Jaime he's dying in the battle? Yeah, we sort of talked about that. I think it's possible that Jaime will die in the battle. And yeah, Bran was definitely raising the possibility of defeat and failure. And Alessandro says, yeah, when did we get so many White Walkers? So yeah, it really does look like an awful lot of White Walkers at the end of the episode here, which I suppose are Craster's sons, Craster's 100 children that he's been giving over all these years. My question is, how did those babies grow up to be these old bearded White Walker men? Like, I guess these guys might be older than Craster. Like, these might be thousands of years old, like the other White Walkers. These could be sacrificed babies from millennia ago. There might be thousands of White Walkers for all we know, because it's been thousands of years. So it's going to be terrifying seeing the full power and extent of the Army of the Dead. Ted says Night King and the majority of Whites are going to attack King's Landing, while smaller portions attack Winterfell. Yeah, that's a cool theory going around that I think makes sense. I mean, they could equally just like lose the Battle of Winterfell and then retreat to King's Landing, and then the majority of White Walkers come down there. But yeah, maybe it's simultaneous. Well, I expect though that the Battle of Winterfell episode will be wholly at Winterfell, because like most of the battle episodes in this series have been devoted to the battle, like Blackwater and the Battle of the Wall. So I wouldn't be surprised if the battle episode takes place entirely at Winterfell. But yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we'll see King's Landing. Thank you, and thank you, Hitakiri. People keep saying it's Shireen's theme. Was it Shireen's theme playing in the credits? I wasn't paying attention to the credits. But yeah, Shireen's theme is this beautiful song that they used when Shireen was around. Eric says, can we talk about Ghost and his role? I don't think Ghost will have a big role, just because like he's barely appeared for seasons now. I think it'll be a bit weird if Ghost suddenly became really important. I suppose they might kill him off just to, twist the knife. But I wouldn't be surprised if Ghost just was really low-key for the rest of the series, because he's been pretty low-key for the whole show. Thanks, Michael Scott. Fresh from Dunder Mifflin. And yeah, Michael Scott says, I thought there were only 10 White Walkers, and yeah, there's a whole bunch more, probably Craster's sons. Thank you, Hairless Oyster. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jade. Yeah, I think Jade that Melisandre will come back to Westeros with an army from Essos. A bunch of red priests and slave soldiers and people from Volantis would make sense. Thank you, Mr. Miki and Jonathan. Mo says, talk about Jenny Oldstones. Yeah, we sort of did. Jenny of Oldstones was this common woman, and a Targaryen prince fell in love with her and gave up his crown to be with her. So that could foreshadow Daenerys or Jon giving up their crown for love or for duty. And Jenny of Oldstones claimed to be descended from the Children of the Forest. And the Children of the Forest are the ones who are associated with the power of the Three-Eyed Raven, which I guess is another sort of connection. But I think more the point of that song is just to give us this sort of wistful, mournful moment right before this battle. Like the point of that song was just sort of saying, hey, look at these relationships. Won't it be sad when everything goes tragically wrong? Never wanted to leave. I think that's the point of the song. Thank you, Nave Nozoid, who says, there are only 4 more episodes left and there's a lot to be resolved. Are you concerned that the show won't wrap up some of the storylines? Also, you have more viewers than Shroud on Twitch right now. Cool. Well, yeah. They've already spent 2 episodes on, like, not a whole lot happening, mostly, like, setup and relationships and reunions. So, yeah, undoubtedly there are going to be lots of sort of loose threads hanging. I think it's clear that they've got a very sort of limited focus on this is about dealing with the White Walkers. This is about the relationships between Jaime and Brienne, and Missandei and Grey Worm, and this is about the Iron Throne and Cersei. I don't think we're gonna be seeing Salador Saan. I don't think Stannis the Manus is gonna come riding in. I don't think we're gonna suddenly get into the intricacies of warging. I think it's really gonna focus on these big central questions, because that's all the episodes have been focusing on. Hairless Oyster says #Swifty Squad. Thank you, Will Johnson, Angie Allen. Angie talks about how Bran's talking about the Night King was a huge reveal. Yeah, I mean, that is as much discussion as we've ever had about the motivation of the Night King. That is new information. The idea that the Night King wants to kill Bran because he's the new three-eyed raven, and the Night King wants to erase not only humanity but the memory of humanity. And I think that also the subtext is it's about the Children of the Forest, because remember, the Night King is this ancient 8,000-year-old dude, and his grudge is against the Children of the Forest who created him. He was programmed to kill humans, but he wanted to kill the Children of the Forest out of his own agency, and that's why we saw him killing the Children of the Forest in season 6. But yeah, I guess he also wants to be very thorough in his job of destroying humans, and that includes destroying the Weirwood, Three-Eyed Raven, Hive Mind consciousness. Which, I don't think they're gonna say in as many words in the show. That's more of a book thing. The idea that the Weirwoods and the Old Gods are like a hive mind of all the dead Greenseers and all the dead Children of the Forest. I don't think they're gonna talk about that, but I think that's part of what informs the Night King's desire to kill the new Three-Eyed Raven. Thank you, A9. Thank you, DA. Thank you, Chase Farmer. Chase Farmer says, are all of these love scenes watering down the narrative? The point of the love scenes is to give us stakes in the narrative. The reason we care about these people who are dying in these battles is because these people have relationships and loves and emotional stakes. That's what stories need in order to have some kind of emotional resonance and in order to have something that matters. That's why it's not just action figures banging against each other. That's why it's not just Orson Lannister going chunk, chunk, chunk. We care about the Beatles, and that's why we don't want Orson Lannister to chunk them. Thank you, Pixelily. Why was this episode called 69? Was that a mistake or a dirty joke? Yeah, for some bizarre reason, the Game of Thrones showrunners are keeping the titles of the episodes secret until the episodes are already out. And I think, it's fair enough to keep it secret until the day of release, but I don't even know what the name of the episode is, and I just watched it. The titles are only accessible after the episode's already out, and that seems silly to me. Maybe it's a problem with HBO Now or whatever, but yeah, they're being too secretive. And leaks are happening anyway. This episode was leaked early, and the previous episode was leaked early, only by hours. But yeah, the whole secrecy thing seems to be doing as much damage as good, I think. Keys Toast says, is time travel ever going to be important again? Yeah, well, in season 6, some people make the argument that hey, the reason why the time travel Hodor Willis thing happened in season 6, Hold the Door, the reason why that happened is because they're establishing time travel as a mechanic that's going to happen again, and there's going to be some crazy time travel thing where Bran is the Night King and he's every important Brandon Stark through history, blah, blah, blah. I think the problem with that argument, or one of the problems, is that the Hold the Door thing with Bran, I think the real point of that wasn't about establishing the mechanics of time travel. It was establishing that Bran done goofed and that Bran's magic has a human cost. It's about realizing that Bran damaged Hodor, this person who he loves and cherishes. He caused this great emotional pain to Hodor. And this tragedy came about as a result of Bran's magic. And so that's a general message that comes up a lot in Game of Thrones, is that magic is a double-edged sword. If you use great power like that, there's a potential for terrible, terrible fuck-ups. And that was also about causing Bran's dehumanization when he lost his personality and became the Three-Eyed Raven. I think that's more kind of what that episode was about for Bran. I think if the series ended in, hey, let's get in the TARDIS and, shoot Hitler before he gets born, I don't think that would feel like a satisfying ending, because, like, there absolutely is, like, super wacky fantasy stuff going on in this series, but, like, it's always been sort of grounded in, like, human decisions and stuff. So I think that the war with the White Walkers will be ended more with, like, Daenerys and Jon committing sacrifices and, love and duty and human heart in conflict with itself. I think those are the sorts of issues that are going to define the end of that conflict. Not so much Bran does a time travel. I don't think Bran's going to stare into the untempered schism and vote Harold Saxon. I think Bran will definitely play a role, a big role, but I don't think time travel is going to be it. The Kerberosis says, how will Arya's mask come in handy? So Arya spent a lot of time learning how to use a faceless mask and, masquerading as Walder Frey and all of that. And you'd think that, that would come in handy again in Season 8. It doesn't seem like it will be very useful against the White Walkers. The White Walkers don't care whose face you've got. If you've got a face, they want to eat it off. So I don't think that disguise is going to be helpful against the White Walkers. So maybe it'll be helpful against Cersei in King's Landing. Arya still has Cersei and the Mountain on her list, so maybe she'll go and try and kill Cersei wearing Jaime's face, or the face of someone, or even Cersei's handmaiden. There's a handmaiden called Bernadette, who has almost no dialogue, but she's actually been in 4 or 5 or 6 seasons of Game of Thrones. This one unnamed handmaiden who keeps hanging around Cersei. I think it would be cool if Arya went and killed Bernadette, wore her face, and then tried to kill Cersei. And I would love it if Arya went to kill Cersei, but then showed mercy to Cersei, because in season 6, Arya was sympathetic towards Cersei as played by Lady Crane in that play. So I think it makes sense that Arya would be sympathetic to Cersei. And that faceless disguise might be how she gets to Cersei in King's Landing later on. Thank you, Suniva. Thank you, The Root and Jeremy Bruce. And thank you, Harrison York. Harrison says, do you think Jon is interested in the Iron Throne? No, I don't think Jon wants to be on the Iron Throne. Jon didn't want to be king in the North. He only accepted it because it was thrust upon him, and he just wanted to do his part to protect his country. And Jon is very much bonded to the North. Whenever he's talking about being king in the North, he always talks about the North is his home, not all of Westeros. He doesn't want to be king of all of Westeros. He's a Northman. But of course, that does change since Jon found out that he's a Targaryen. Maybe Jon will feel like he's not just a Northman. He's actually has some claim to the throne. But even so, I don't think Jon has ambitions to be a king. But one thing that's consistent throughout his arc is that Jon accepts responsibility when it's thrust upon him, when he feels like it's his duty. So I think it is possible that the series will end with Jon on the Iron Throne as a reluctant king who's very sad and emo about the recent death of Daenerys. I think that's one possible way that it could end. I think more likely is that Jon makes some sort of semi-magical sacrifice thing. Thank you, Hayden Hall, who says that it would cost too much. It would be over budget to do a super big dragon attack. Well, look, I think they spent more than enough money on these episodes. They could probably afford a dragon attack. I don't know. Dude says, could the Three-Eyed Raven have been created to maintain the original peace agreement between men and the others? That's an interesting idea. I think the Three-Eyed Raven might predate even the others, because the Three-Eyed Raven is he's an institution of the Children of the Forest and the Old Gods and the Weirwoods. I could imagine the Three-Eyed Raven existing for thousands of years even before the Long Night. But yeah, I mean, that could also be a point. Maybe the Children of the Forest started creating the Three-Eyed Raven when it became apparent that the Children of the Forest were on their way out. Like the elves in the Lord of the Rings, the Children of the Forest are this, the magical, noble species dying off. And so maybe they created the Three-Eyed Raven to remember them, to store their souls. The Children of the Forest, they don't have an Undying Lands to go off to like the elves in the Lord of the Rings. So the Children of the Forest made their own Undying Lands by creating this, weirwood, hive mind for their souls to live in after they die. A little bit like in Westworld, the door that goes to the Windows XP land where all of the robot souls live. Westworld was interesting, guys. There are some pretty good videos about Westworld by a little-known channel called Alt Shift X. But my point is that, yeah, maybe the Three-Eyed Raven like has some ancient role with the Long Night and the Pact and all of that. But of course, it is just wild speculation, the idea that there was ever a peace agreement between humans and White Walkers. I think if there was a peace agreement between humans and White Walkers, it would be the Night's King who was created to maintain it, because there's that legend about the human who sacrificed his soul to a White Walker and ruled in the Night Fort. He ruled on the Wall as like this sort of Dark Lord who was married to a White Walker. I think it's possible that that's a corruption of the original story of a human who actually like was set up to be the intermediary between the humans and the White Walkers. And if anything, Jon Snow could become that new Night's King by like marrying a White Walker, ruling on the Wall for a new peace between humans and the White Walkers. I really like that theory. I don't think it'll happen in the show. Just because like that, they're not really interested in like sort of humanizing the White Walkers, and the books aren't really either very much. So that's probably just wistful thinking. Thank you, Mahir. Thank you, Zachary. Thank you, Tom O. Thank you, Christina. Christina says, "Do you think Bronn will kill Tyrion?" Nah, I think like maybe he'll try, but I don't think death by Bronn would be a very interesting death for Tyrion. I think Tyrion's death has to be more related to his family and like rejection by the people more generally and stuff. Well, I guess they could do it in an emotional way, because there was that thing in season 4 where Bronn was like, "Hey Tyrion, like, we are mates, but I'm not going to risk my life for you by fighting the Mountain because you've never risked your life for me. This is like an unequal relationship. You have this higher status in this relationship, and it's not equal and it's not fair, and the relationship isn't on equal ground." And maybe they could sort of play on those ideas for Bronn killing Tyrion, but I don't think Bronn will kill Tyrion. I think in all likelihood he'll just join Jaime and Tyrion again and just say, "Hey, make sure you remember to pay me double. I want 4 castles now." Anime Andrew says, "Do you think Jon wanted to say that he wants to have the throne after it's all done?" Yeah. I think that would be a sensible thing for Jon to say. I think if Daenerys understood Jon at all, Daenerys would realize that Jon doesn't want the throne and isn't really a rival to her. Although, there are comparisons to like historical events like the Blackfire rebellions and stuff where, even if Jon himself doesn't want to be king, there might be other people like Sam or like other people in the north or like Sansa who do want Jon to be king. So like even if Jon personally doesn't want to be king, the fact that he has a claim could be exploited by other people in a way that is a problem for Daenerys. So yeah, that could be an issue. JH says, "Do you think Sam's speech about forgetting history indicates that he is to be the in-story author of A Song of Ice and Fire?" Yeah. Yeah, there's a really popular theory that maybe at the end of the series, Sam Tarly will write the book, A Song of Ice and Fire. He'll write a history of everything that just happened. And yeah, the fact that he talks about the importance of remembering and history, yeah, I think that supports that idea. That's a really good point. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, the Curbanosis. Thank you, Reed K. Reed K says, "Why focus all the attention inside Winterfell? Felt like it was filler." Yeah, well, I think they're just establishing the stakes for the next episode. I think this is all about giving meaning and giving weight to everything that's going to go down in Winterfell next episode. And also just reminding everyone what the relationships are. I mean, it's been 2 years since the last season of Game of Thrones. There's a lot of casual viewers who don't remember, who's in love with who has history. So I agree that like it's pretty crazy to spend 2 out of 6 episodes on that sort of like setup. We're a third of the way through the season, but I think that's why they're doing it, to give some real meaning and stakes behind the insanity that's going to happen next episode. Amelia says that Tormund would have amazing babies with Brienne, no doubt. Chris says we would have seen Melisandre tonight. I reckon we'll see her later, maybe during the Battle of Winterfell. Live to Think reckons that Night King will go to King's Landing and take the 1 million people of King's Landing as his whites. Yeah, that's the popular theory at the moment. Maybe the Night King will attack King's Landing and make his own army of the dead there. Thank you, Baird. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, Yeah, Brian points out that they mentioned that the crypts are safe like a gazillion times, which, if they're going on about the importance and the safety of the crypts that much, I mean, the crypts are like shown in detail in the opening sequence now, like they're really emphasizing the importance of the crypts, which, might support the idea that there's some kind of secret in the crypts, something crazy happens in the crypts, maybe the dead will rise from the crypts. Something along those lines. Maybe the Night King will go down to the crypts to free his Night's Queen, is a pretty popular book theory. But, yeah. Reed K says, how do you think the show's plot will affect George Martin's writing? Yeah, well, he reckons that it won't affect it at all and it won't change it, but, come on, it must. There must be things where he's like, seeing that different thing in the show, that's actually pretty cool, so I'll use that in the books. Or also just obviously psychologically the success of the show is going to affect his writing. I'm not here to psychoanalyze George, but obviously George has said that he feels terrible that the show has passed the books and that the show is going to end before he's gotten the next book out, and George is obviously really struggling with the next book, The Winds of Winter, so yeah, I think it would be really hard for him. Mr. Theo says, new theory, Jon and Dany both live, but they end up enemies. Jon in the north and Dany in the south, and the wheel keeps on turning for power. Yeah, I mean, continued conflict could be something that happens, because part of the point of Game of Thrones is that history doesn't end. Game of Thrones started with the heroic Robert Baratheon beating the evil king and getting the girl, but that didn't end everything. That didn't end with a happily ever after. It just continued with more conflict. So maybe, the end of Game of Thrones won't mean that, good guys win, everything's fine, yippee. It might continue with, more conflict being foreshadowed. I think that could happen. I think Jon and Dany as opponents in the end, I doubt. But I certainly don't think it'll end with a happy, unified Westeros. I think the throne will likely be destroyed. Maybe the Seven Kingdoms will break off into independent kingdoms again. There could be the seeds of future conflict there. Patrick says that Jon Royce wants Sansa to run the Vale after the long night. Yeah, well, maybe Royce wants Sansa to marry Sweet Robin, because Bronze Jon Royce is not a big fan of Sweet Robin and probably doesn't want him to rule the Vale. But Royce clearly respects Sansa as a leader, so yeah, maybe he would want Sansa to marry Sweet Robin and sort of run things and continue the Arryn legacy. Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. And, certainly in the books, Sansa is sort of gunning for power in the Vale, so yeah, not implausible. A divergent thinker says, I'm noticing more Lord of the Rings parallels each episode. Do you suppose Jon will mirror Aragorn and lead the army of the dead? Yeah, so Jon has a lot of parallels with Aragorn being this sort of forgotten heir to the throne who, heroically fights for the good, and in The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn goes and leads the dead men of Dunharrow in The Return of the King. And what's happening now in Game of Thrones is that Aegon Targaryen, he's returning as the king. It's sort of the same stuff happening. Yeah, and so the question with, if the dead rise from the crypts, will the dead fight for the good guys, or will they fight for the White Walkers? These are Stark kings that were buried in Winterfell, and presumably they'd fight for the living Starks. But then again, there is a certain amount of hints and speculation that those ancient Starks were part White Walker, or were allied with the White Walkers, or at the very least, they were some frosty, brutal dudes. So maybe, if the dead rise, yeah, they might not be on the side of the living. Darren D says, Stannis. Thank you, Michael Lee. Thank you, No Regrets. No Regrets says, Arya asks if anyone can take out the Night King with a dragon. Bran says no one has tried. Foreshadowing. I don't think the Night King will be killed with a dragon just because it doesn't feel personal enough. Like a sword fight with Jon seems kind of almost too obvious, but maybe something in between. Some kind of something that is a little bit more up close and personal than CGI dragon fire. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly how the Night King himself will die. Maybe the Night King won't die. Maybe the Night King will just sacrifice himself and turn into a puddle as Jon becomes the new Night King or something. It might be something more complex. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, PB and Pete. Pete says that Tyrion actually sounded like Tyrion again a few times there. Yeah, Tyrion's dialogue has not been that exciting in some recent episodes. Balls, 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 he was saying before. But yeah, I enjoyed Tyrion this episode. Thank you, Alistair and Alec and Nick, who points out that Arya lost her V card. Paul says White Walker, Ramsay, or no one. Or Wun Wun, he says. Yeah, are we going to see zombie versions of beloved characters? Are we going to see zombie Hodor? Are we going to see zombie Rickon? Are we going to see zombie Headless Ned? That would be upsetting. Certainly if anyone dies like during this battle, we could have them resurrected in the same episode and fight against the living. That would be fucked up. If, you know, Grey Worm had to defend himself against zombie Missandei or something, that would be fucked up. Michael says, can Arya wear a White Walker's face? Well, every time that we've seen a White Walker killed, they've like shattered into ice. And I don't think you can get a face out of ice. Maybe she could wear a white face, like a zombie face, but I imagine that would smell bad. Thank you, Sims, and thank you, Ryan. Aaron says, the little girl with Davos was meant to evoke his love for Shireen. They played her Patchface song in the background. Yeah, I didn't notice the song, but yeah, that's a good point. Like, Davos had a lot of love for Shireen, who he sort of took as a sort of adopted daughter because her parents, Selyse and Stannis, didn't look after her properly. And yeah, the fact that this little girl with Davos this episode had that scar on her face does make her look a bit like Shireen, who was the girl who Davos loved and looked after. So yeah, it's a good point. I think that's definitely deliberate. Navanozoid said, press F to pay respects for Pip and Gren and all the super chats that will go unread by Alt-Shift-X. We are gonna try and work through them. But yeah, apologies if we miss any, but we're gonna try and get through these. PB says, waiting for Alt-Shift-X is just as exciting as waiting for Game of Thrones. Thank you, PB. Thank you, Ryan. Robert Mugabe says, is Gilly preggers? She's glowing swole. I don't know. It would be pretty adorable if Sam and Gilly have a baby together. Maybe that could happen. I don't know. Sean says, you've greatly enhanced this world for me and many friends and family. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Saniva says, you missed the Shireen throwback. Yeah, we just discussed that. And yeah, I missed that at first. Harmon 2005 says this was episode 69, so did Arya and Gendry do 69? We can only speculate. Patrick says, it's just like Lord of the Rings. They could have used the eagles to drop Frodo off at Mount Doom. Yeah, well, in the same way, in Game of Thrones, they could have just crash-landed the dragons onto the Night King and burned his face off. Angie says, there are only 2 living dragons versus 1 undead one. Yeah, you'd think that 2 living dragons could beat 1 zombie dragon. You'd think. Like, they just fill him with fire, rip his head off. Like, you'd think that would be possible. There are a bunch of dragon battles in the lore, in the books. And, yeah, it gets pretty gnarly. Like that one time that Aemond One Eye had his sword... had an eye through his sword by someone climbing off their dragon, jumping onto the other dragon mid-flight, and then both dragons and both men crashing into the God's Eye Lake. So some pretty metal stuff can happen with dragon battles. Harry Hawk says, burn the forest while the dead march through them. I know, right? Like, why are they just sitting here with their thumbs in their asses instead of proactively going out with the dragons to just prevent any of them from getting here? You know? You'd think that'd make sense. Henry says Aegon couldn't conquer Dawn with Balerion. Because, yeah, dragons have their shortcomings. Aegon the Conqueror had the biggest dragon in the world, and even he couldn't make Dawn submit to his rule. But, I mean, I think zombies are another story. They're not going to be waging a guerrilla war over decades with the White Walkers. Thank you, American. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Darkside. The dragons need armor, Darkside says. Yeah, well, they've got saddles, at least in the books. Whereas in the show, Jon is like holding on for dear life to Rhaegal's scales, which seems a bit ridiculous. I guess it just complicates the CGI and the design. It's a bit tricky, but yeah, it would make sense if they had armor. Because, you know, maybe if Drogon had armor, he wouldn't have been shot down by that ballista last season. Cameron says, how effed would they be if they lost a dragon? Yeah, well, I suppose the problem is that if one of Daenerys' dragons die, then that's another dragon for the White Walkers. And if the good guys have to fight against 2 undead dragons at once, yeah, I agree. They would be pretty effed. But then again, like I would expect that the two living dragons will die by the end of the series, just because dragons are this destructive, warlike force. It seems only natural that they should die if we're entering a time of peace. And yet, if the dragons defeat the White Walkers, who's going to kill the dragons? So yeah, what will the fates of Drogon and Rhaegal be? That's maybe it'll be something like they'll fly off into the north with Daenerys on some kind of sacrificial suicide mission against whatever lurks in the far north or something. That could be cool. Thank you, Mumford and Sons. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah says, cut off Bran's arm. Because, so Bran has this mark on his arm, and apparently the Night King knows where Bran is at all times because of that mark. So maybe just cut the mark off. That would be funny. What if they just, cut off the mark, made Ghost swallow it, and then said, Ghost, run somewhere else. Just put him on Yara's boat. Just take the mark off to Lonely Light. Just take it far west, and just the Night King will just go follow him like a dog chasing a bone. That'd be funny. Thank you, American. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, No Regrets. Thank you, Daniel Finlay. Thank you, Peter version 1. Thank you. Peter version 1 asks if Tormund will fight Jaime. Well, yeah, they're both sort of competing for Brienne's affections, aren't they? But I think it's clear who Brienne has chosen between Tormund and Jaime. I don't think Tormund will get a lot of success with Brienne, sadly. Thank you to Kate12. Thank you to JH. Oh, that's interesting. So JH points out that Alice Karstark, who's the sort of red-headed lady of Karstark, she looks a bit like Sansa, what with the red hair. This is Alice Karstark on the left here, who appeared in the episode. And she does look like Sansa from behind, so maybe if Alice Karstark got turned into a white, maybe we'll see the back of her and go, oh my golly gosh, it's Sansa. That would be upsetting. Thank you, Alex. Alex says, wouldn't the Night King win by default if he didn't show up to the battle? Yeah, you'd think if the Night King was smart, he just wouldn't attack Winterfell. Like, he'd just starve them out. Like we know that the living don't have enough food to survive with all these people. The Night King could literally just stand and watch as the humans starve, just like we saw him stand and watch in Season 7, Episode 6. I mean, the dead surely are patient, right? Like, surely, like the White Walkers have waited thousands of years before they attacked. If they literally just waited a year longer, they could walk into Winterfell and it'd be nothing but bones, you'd think, right? I guess maybe the Night King's downfall, like all bad guys, is just going to be his, like, hubris and overestimating himself. The Night King will just, make himself vulnerable, then he'll get lured out because he was too, arrogant and self-assured, and that'll be his downfall, maybe. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Bastiat. Thank you, Nick Homey. How will the Hound's storyline end? I think the Hound will undoubtedly fight his brother the Mountain in Clegane Bowl, and maybe he'll be like critically injured in that fight, or maybe the Hound will survive and he'll go back to hanging out with Brother Ray, or a new Brother Ray, and he'll be a silent monk like he is in the books. Thank you, Mark. Mark asks if Jorah will kill his Nissa Daenerys Targaryen. So yeah, I think if anyone Nissa's Daenerys, it's going to be Jon. That is, if anyone sacrifices Daenerys, I think Jon will be the one to do it. But Jorah certainly does love Daenerys, so he maybe could also fit the imagery as well, yeah. Eli S. Points out that the basement full of wildfire would be pretty helpful right about now. Thank you, DXK and Luke and Jamie. Matt says, will Jon kill Dany? Yeah, well, the symbolism of the Azor Ahai Nissa story does suggest that Jon would kill Dany. But I think maybe they might reverse that and have like Daenerys stab Jon with dragonglass and turn him into a White Walker person instead. I think that would be a cool subversion. Philippe says, can Bran warg into Viserion? We've never seen Bran warg into a zombie. But if the zombies are essentially being warged by the Night King, like if it is the White Walker's necromancy is essentially a kind of skin changing or warging, then maybe Bran will be able to take over control of the undead. So maybe there'll be a psychic battle where Night King and Bran fight over control of the undead, and maybe Viserion will be taken by Bran. I think that would be cool. Thank you, Teng Ming and Luke. Luke asks about the likelihood of a retreat to the Iron Islands. Yeah, well, Yara conspicuously said last episode that, hey, Daenerys is going to need a place to retreat. The Iron Islands, I've got these ships in the Iron Islands. We can just run back here if we need to. But then again, we also saw Daenerys and Jon at Dragonstone. So I don't know if everyone's going to retreat to the Iron Islands or Dragonstone or what. But yeah, I think a defeat and a retreat does seem likely next episode because it's only episode 3. Matthew Kenny says the Hound is technically in the Night's Watch. I don't see how that's the case. The Hound never joined the Night's Watch. The Hound did join the Brotherhood Without Banners, but that's a different organization. He did go beyond the wall, but I don't think the Hound's in the Night's Watch. Tormund said whoever is not here is dead, Christopher said. Yeah, that's a good point. That was a really scary moment when, Tormund came to Winterfell and he's like, hey, Jon, the White Walkers are coming, this is a problem, and Tormund said that all of Last Hearth is gone and whoever is not here is dead. The implication being that all the other castles, all the other Northerners, all the other strongholds, they've all been defeated by the White Walkers, and Winterfell is it. So I guess everyone in the north has rallied to Winterfell, basically, which, is probably not literally true. But the point is that this is the last stand, and whoever isn't here has become one of our enemies because they've been raised by the White Walkers. Jessica says Sam mentioned his books again, so maybe he'll find a discovery inside about Azor Ahai or something. That would be cool. I would like some kind of payoff because, when Sam went to the Citadel, everyone was like, ooh, is he going to learn the secret of, making Valyrian steel? Is he going to learn the secret of the White Walkers and their creation? Is he going to learn some big secret that's really important? All Sam discovered in the Citadel was that there's dragon glass under Dragonstone, which Stannis already told him in Season 4. So, yeah, I would like Sam to discover something important in the books. I mean, well, he did discover the marriage thing with Lyanna and Rhaegar, but we already knew about R + L = J from Bran's vision. So, yeah, I would like to see something important come from Sam's books. Matt Russell says, yeah, Dolorous Ed corrected Sam about the one Then he's killed instead of the multiple. Yeah, Dolorous Ed is quite funny in the books, and I think that does indeed fit his character. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Ricky Sue. Ricky Sue ships Gendry and Arya. Yeah, I think it works. Although I think Gendry and Arya might be not a super romantic relationship, and like specifically the sex they had this episode, I think was more about need and hey, we're literally gonna die, so fuck it. I don't know if they have the time to develop a deep emotional relationship between Gendry and Arya in the next 4 episodes. Maybe it'll end tragically. Maybe Gendry will be killed next episode or something. And then Arya just gets even more angry and sort of emo as a result. I don't know. Or maybe they sail off west together in the end. There's a lot of things that could happen there. Thank you, Metal Bat, who says, has the show spoiled that certain subplots like Arya the Heir, Aegon, etc. are ultimately irrelevant? It's really hard to tell. Maybe we'll know more once it sort of ends properly, but I guess it does reveal what the sort of overall arcs are about. With Sansa, Sansa's arc is clearly about Sansa becoming a powerful, intelligent power player, a political force, and I think the show has sort of skipped some steps along the way. People keep saying, Arya says Sansa is the smartest person I've ever met. Sansa hasn't done very many smart things in recent seasons, she trusted Littlefinger, she married Ramsay, she didn't tell Jon about the Knights of the Vale. She's made a lot of really questionable decisions, actually. The smartest thing she's done is, remind everyone that food is important, which I wholeheartedly agree on that point. But I think what that might reveal is that, all the stuff that they've cut from Sansa's book arc about, Arya the Heir and the Vale and all of that stuff, yeah, I think maybe you're right. I think those subplots will be important in the development of the characters. I think, Harry the Heir will be important for Sansa's development as a character, and I think that young Griff will be important for Daenerys's development as a character. So I wouldn't say that they are irrelevant subplots. I think they add context and weight, which is in some ways missing from the show, So I think maybe that's what's going on. Christopher Cruz says, will Jaime be important? I think there's decent odds that Jaime might die next episode. Personally, I'd prefer if Jaime died after killing Cersei in King's Landing, but maybe Jaime will die in the arms of Brienne next episode. But maybe this episode was Jaime's episode because his judgment and his humility and knighting Brienne. Maybe this is the most sort of Jaime centric episode of the season. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Ramus. Andrea says, thanks for joining. Do you think Cersei is pregnant? How will it influence the storyline? Yeah, so Tyrion in this episode is like, did Cersei lie about the pregnancy? And Jaime said no, she is pregnant, or she was pregnant. I think that the most likely explanation is that Cersei was pregnant and now she's not due to miscarriage. There was a rumor going around that there was a cut scene from last season where Cersei had a miscarriage. And I think that would explain Cersei's emotions when Euron was talking about pregnancy with her. Yeah, how will it affect the storyline? It's really weird. I think one possibility is that if Cersei is still pregnant, maybe she'll have a miscarriage later, and then after she has a miscarriage, she'll go full Mad Queen. Because Tyrion keeps saying that, in D&D, the showrunners have said that, her children is what makes Cersei human and sympathetic, and losing them will just make her more angry and dangerous. So, maybe there'll be a moment where she loses the baby and then she goes full Mad King wildfire all over King's Landing. I think that's possible. But, yeah, it's hard to predict exactly what the child will be. I think it's so weird how, the child and, Cersei's alliance with the good guys was such a big plot point last season. But now in season 2 already, they've just said, oh, no, Cersei was lying. So Cersei's betrayal is, it's not going to be a surprise if the Golden Company, attacks Jon and Daenerys. So, yeah, it's a weird subplot. I'm not sure where it's going. Thanks, Kyle and Ramos and Davis the Partan. And Ramos says, why don't they send all the useless people south? Because Cersei's in the south, and Cersei's not likely to accept a whole bunch of northern refugees. Thank you, Michael Smith. Thank you, Jan Og. Jan says, where is Melisandre? She's off in the east in Volantis. She'll probably come back with some sick, fiery soldiers. Thank you, DT, Joel, and Gwatham. Thank you, Elaine. Now that Dany knows the truth about Jon, how do you think she reacts? Does the North stay together with the allies? Yeah, I think the reaction from the Northern Lords is going to be interesting with Jon's true parentage. The Northern Lords, are they going to not like Jon when they find out that he's a Targaryen? Because, the Northern Lords don't like Daenerys because she's a Targaryen. Maybe they won't trust Jon because he has Targaryen blood. Or on the other hand, maybe the Northern Lords are going to be like, hey, we already trust Jon, so maybe he should be the king of Westeros. Maybe the North would accept being a subsidiary of the Iron Throne if Jon was the king. So they'd be happy to be ruled only if Jon is the ruler, maybe. Thank you, Varel and Smite and Nathan and Juramal and Jonathan. Yeah, so it's interesting that Brienne was called a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, because there's a character in the Dunk and Egg short stories called Duncan the Tall, and his series is called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And George Martin has said that Brienne is actually a descendant of Dunk, the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So I think that's definitely a deliberate callback. And Dunk is interesting because he was possibly not knighted legitimately. There's this theory that he was never actually properly knighted, he just claimed he was. But anyway, thank you, Arashna, who reckons that there should be a spin-off series about Tormund. Thank you, T. Conrad. Thank you, the Gatinor. The Gatinor reckons that Jon does want to rule. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy says, why are all the White Walkers rocking the fishbowl in the front, party in the back, haircut? Yeah, who is doing the hairstyling for the White Walkers, do you think? Do they have a barber who uses ice scissors and ice knives to cut their hair? I don't know. Thanks, Smite and Philippe. Philippe says the Night King is in the next episode trailer. Yeah, I haven't seen the next episode trailer. That'll be cool. Chris says, Dany and Jon are cousins, works for me. They aren't a nephew, but yeah, it works for Chris. Patrick says, the Night King is there. You can see his weapon. I don't think that's true. I'm pretty sure the Night King is not in this shot. There are multiple ice spears here. The ice spears aren't unique to the Night King. Thank you, Streaks. And Pranav and Peter, we've sort of answered most of these questions. Andre says, do you ever think we'll see the Winds of Winter? I think we will probably see the Winds of Winter, but I've got my doubts about A Dream for Spring. Tim Murphy says, do White Walkers become old men like instantly? Where are my moody teen White Walkers? It would be great to see some teenage White Walkers or some child White Walkers. I wonder what sort of adolescence they go through. That's a sub-series in itself. Thank you, Justin, and Build It Up, and the Tao Zun, who reckons that Melisandre and Nymeria will be the Eagles are coming, like in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I can see that. Nymeria and her wolf pack riding in to save the day. Thank you, S. Delexi. Why are they only guarding one side of the castle, they ask. That's a good question, because it's in this shot that they've got all their armies out the front of the castle here, but not down on the southern end. The White Walkers could easily just go around, and then they'd be a lot harder to stop, I'd imagine, yeah, but I'm no White Walker battle strategist. Thank you, Atacapa and Solar Jesus and Waffles Cool. Good names. Stereo says, can the Night King take control of the zombie mountain? Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like, the mountain is undead. I mean, it's ambiguous in the show, but in the books at least, the mountain, Gregor Clegane, he does die and then come back, it seems. And if the Night King can control the dead, maybe he'll be able to control the mountain. That would be scary indeed. Thank you, Anero. Anero says, how will Dany's supporters react to Jon's claim? I think Dany's supporters, like Jorah and Missandei and Grey Worm and Tyrion, like, they follow Dany because they believe in her. Like, it's not just that she's a Targaryen, it's because she's Misa, she's made sacrifices for the team, she's compassionate, she does what's necessary to protect her people. I think that's why they believe in her. Like, it's a very personal faith that they have. And they don't have that belief in Jon. So even if Jon has a better claim, I don't think Dany's supporters are going to jump ship or anything. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Nonsensical Alexis. Bran says, Alexis says that it's interesting that Bran chose the Godswood as the place to make his stand. Yeah. Well, the Godswood is the place of the Weirwoods. It's the place of the old gods. So it makes perfect sense for Bran, the Three-Eyed Raven, to be there. I don't know if it'll, like, anything will happen with the Weirwoods. Like, I don't expect, the trees to get all enty or anything, but yeah, that could be interesting. Thank you, Praise and Phoenix and Sandor and McGullen and Knock Knight. Knock Knight, yeah, so we will be making a Season 8 Episode 2 explained video, just like last week, or a couple of days ago. That one was pretty slow. We'll try and get this next video done quicker. Mendel says that Jaime is looking like Azor Ahai. I think that Jaime could play an Azor Ahai sort of a role, but I doubt that Jaime is going to... well, he might wave a flaming sword, actually, but I don't think Jaime's going to be the Azor Ahai. I think if anyone is the Azor Ahai, it's got to be either Jon or Daenerys. But Jaime could certainly play a similar role. I mean, he's certainly going to be fighting the dead next season, and I think if anyone's going to be sacrificed, it'll be him, though, not Brienne. I don't think Jaime will Nissa Brienne. Thank you, James and Dan and Sir Hype the Dank. Yeah, Sir Hype the Dank reckons the Night King and Cersei are red herrings. It'll be all about Jon versus Daenerys. I don't think it'll be Jon versus Daenerys. I think there will be conflict there, but I think that ultimately, like, they will love each other and they will make some sort of sacrifice and, like... I mean, in the books, there is this, like, Dance of the Dragons thing where young Griff, this, like, fake Targaryen, is set to have a fight with Daenerys. I think that is sort of what that might represent, but I wouldn't expect, like, war between Jon and Daenerys. Blue Dog says that the vision Dany had of a dragon's shadow over King's Landing will be of the Night King riding Viserion. Yeah, I think that's possible. I think it's also possible that vision was just of the past. Let me pull that up. Because that was in, like, season 4. That was a long time ago. And people have been speculating, yeah, this shot here, that there's a silhouette, the shadow of a dragon flying over King's Landing. And yeah, maybe that's the Night King next episode, flying down to King's Landing to burn it all. Or maybe that's Daenerys coming to King's Landing to claim her throne. I mean, Daenerys has already come to King's Landing with her dragon, so maybe this is just season 7, episode 7, with Drogon flying. Or maybe it's just in the distant past, some other time when a dragon flew over King's Landing. Although, is Baelor's Sept visible there? No. Yeah, so that could really be anything. And that's pretty outdated, like CGI anyway, so I wouldn't expect to see that actual shot. Chris says Moat Cailin would be a good spot for the final confrontation, and Howland Reed is near there, so he could confirm Jon's parentage. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Moat Cailin would make a lot of sense, because Moat Cailin's like the chokehold between the north and the south. It would be a good place to fight the army of the dead, because that's like the bottleneck where they'll try and get through, unless the Night King circumvents all of that and flies down and turns King's Landing into zombies. Thank you, Mike. Although I'd add that the Trident might be where the real final battle happens because of a vision that Daenerys has in one of the books. Mike mentions the Reeds as well. Yeah, they're in the neck. I suspect we won't see Mira and Howland again because, most show watchers don't know who Howland is, and, Mira sort of had a bit of a farewell last season, but maybe they'll turn up. Maybe they'll turn up as whites. Mandrick says the opening sequence shows blue tiles as the Undead army approaches, so it does seem inevitable that they will reach King's Landing. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, there's no point in showing those advancing blue tiles if they only advance in episode 1 to last half, then episode 2 halfway, and then episode 3 to Winterfell, and they're just gone and defeated for the rest of the series. I agree. It makes sense if those tiles eventually advance all the way to King's Landing. Caligulov says that Podrick is Azor Ahai. Daniel says, why don't they talk about Bran's magic? Yeah, good question. I mean, Tyrion has a sit-down chat with Bran at one point, and I'm intrigued to know what they talked about because that scene just cut before we saw anything, so I wonder what Tyrion learned. Fife Nation says, can Bran see all the way back to the first long night? I reckon we've got to get some kind of big ancient vision from Bran this season. Like, what else is that magic power for, if not to see some, like, ancient secrets? Heather says, Tyrion says, I think we might win, after he spoke to Bran. That's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Because, yeah, Tyrion does make a pretty optimistic statement. And if that was, like, right after his talk with Bran, that would be suggestive that, like, hey, maybe he learned something from Bran. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Vegas says, what would be your thought on the ending of next episode with the Night King using Dragonglass to transfer the Night King rule to Bran? Ooh. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, the Night King supposedly wants to kill the Three-Eyed Raven. Would the Night King want to convert the Three-Eyed Raven into a White Walker? I guess, if he likes to corrupt the symbol of the Children of the Forest spiral, maybe he'd like to corrupt the Three-Eyed Raven himself into a tool of the White Walkers. Yeah, that could be cool. Don says, does the Iron Throne survive? Well, we've already seen that vision of the Iron Throne burned, or at least the throne room burned in Season 2, Episode 10. So I don't expect the throne to survive, no. Super chat from Shadow Freud and James and No Regrets. No Regrets says, with the prequels happening, how much do you think we'll learn of the Night King? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, supposedly this prequel series will be about the Long Night and like the origins of the White Walkers and all that kind of stuff. And that being the case, you'd think it has to be partly about the Night King. I think it would be, I don't know, it'd be kind of weird if that prequel series was about, like, establishing the motivations of the bad guy of the main series. Like, what is this, Star Wars prequels? Like, I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. I imagine that the prequel might be more about its own sort of conflict and its own sort of story. But yeah, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, that prequel might not even get made into a series for all we know. They're still filming a pilot, so yeah, I'll wait and see. Shadow Freud asks if Bronn will kill Jaime or Tyrion. I doubt it. I think Jaime will die in the arms of the woman he loves. And I think Tyrion will, well, I don't know how Tyrion will die, but it has to be more about his family than about Bronn. Thank you, Zach and Matt. I don't know if we're going to get through all of these. Ander Reese says, stop talking about Animorphs. Lemon Cop says, last week you talked about Jon replacing the Night King, but what if Daenerys Targaryen becomes the Night Queen with her undead dragons, freeing the Night King's undead like with the Unsullied? Yeah, that's a good point. That would be cool. Like, Daenerys' whole, like, anti-slavery vibe could be sort of evoked by Daenerys freeing the undead from their magical bondage. Yeah, that could be cool. And, you know, Daenerys' vision in Season 2 where she goes beyond the wall amongst the ice, you know, maybe that foreshadows her being some kind of ice queen. Maybe Jon and Daenerys will both become White Walker people in the end. But I think, you know, I think even that would be too happy an ending. I think Jon and Daenerys can't end the story together. Patrick says, if the Night King is all about destroying knowledge, wouldn't he go to Old Town? I think the Night King is interested in a more sort of arcane definition of knowledge. And I think, you know, we saw when Sam went to the Citadel, the Maesters are not the be-all and end-all on knowledge. They're sort of stuffy academics. You know, they're very good at recording their shits and their windows, but I think the Three-Eyed Raven has the real OG knowledge. The ancient, real stuff is what the Night King's going for. Dark Arrow says, do you think the children will show back up? Maybe in visions, but I don't think in person. I think the children have been wiped out by the White Walkers at this point, because the children are all in the far north. I mean, unless there's something going on at the Isle of Faces with the Green Men or something, but that's a whole other thing. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Mamadur, who says, I don't think the Night King is going to go to King's Landing. If he was, then Bran would know. Well, maybe Bran knows, but he's not telling, because Bran has some sort of predestined thing where he's like, well, this is how things have to go, because this is how he'll be defeated, and bad things have to happen along the way, maybe. Sean says, is the Night King a Targaryen? I think the Night King might be a Stark, because he seems to be possibly a warg, but I don't see any evidence of the Night King being a Targaryen. I mean, he does ride a dragon, so maybe that's evidence that the Night King is a Targaryen, but I don't know. I mean, maybe. I think the Night King is more connected to the North and like that ancient history, and the Long Night. Like, I don't know if Targaryens are necessarily involved in that story, although there are some fruity theories depending on who you ask. Thank you, Ian and Gizmo and Bobby. Bobby says, should we expect all the prophecies to come true? Probably not, because part of the point of prophecies is that they're sort of unreliable. I think that the usual pattern is for the prophecy to come true in like an unexpected or unwanted way. Like the Valancourt prophecy or whatever. But, you know, not all the prophecies will necessarily happen. Like, you know, the stallion that mounts the world didn't exactly happen. That prophesied baby of Daenerys didn't conquer any countries. And, you know, maybe Daenerys is the stallion who mounts the world or something, but, you know, they might be fulfilled vaguely, if at all, is I suppose what I'm saying. Joe says, if the crypts were there since the First War, then why do they not burn their dead? Very good point. If Winterfell was founded in the original war with the White Walkers, and if it's super important to burn the dead so that the dead don't rise, then why are these ancient Starks not burning their dead? So one theory is that, like, the Starks were actually sort of sympathetic to the White Walkers in some way, or they were part White Walker, and maybe what's down in the crypts is like some ancient White Walker Stark kings, like down in the deep forgotten levels of the crypts. Maybe down there are like part White Walkers who are being like held within their statues or something by some magic, which is sort of implied in some of the books. So maybe that's why they don't burn the dead. Noah says that undead Jaime kills Cersei to complete the prophecy. Yeah, so maybe Jaime dies in Brienne's arms, and then the undead Jaime kills Cersei and then is vanquished in her arms. So maybe Jaime will die in the arms of both of the women he loves. That would be interesting. One sec. Motive says, what's Daenerys' reaction to Jon being the heir? Well, she's upset that she's not the last Targaryen anymore, and she's upset that there's a rival to her claim to the throne, but I think that her love for Jon will sort of ease that to some extent. Brinks says, will the show sweep away the whole White Walker battle in episode 3 and be done, and then shoehorn the whole Dance of the Dragons 2 story in the end? Yeah, so there's sort of two ways it can go down, aren't there? Like, either the White Walkers are defeated next episode, and then the last 3 episodes are about Cersei v Daenerys v Jon, maybe. or the White Walkers beat the Winterfellites next episode, and then the White Walker battle continues until the finale. I kind of tend towards the second option, but I don't know. Like they talked about how George Martin has said that he admires the ending to Lord of the Rings, specifically the scouring of the Shire, because in the Lord of the Rings they defeat Sauron, but then there's a whole bunch more chapters where the hobbits go back to the Shire, and then they have to fight Saruman, who's taken over the Shire. And it's like this smaller scale battle that happens. Maybe in the same way, Game of Thrones, they'll defeat the White Walkers, but then they'll go back and have to deal with Cersei at King's Landing as like a smaller epilogue story. So yeah, that's not without precedent. I think that could be interesting. Uday says that Arya and Varys will survive Winterfell. Melisandre said that she will see Arya again. Yeah, well, it's also possible that Melisandre comes to the Battle of Winterfell, meets Arya, and then Arya dies. That could happen, but I don't think it will. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Uncle Bad Touch, who says, was the Mad King Aerys a victim like Hodor? Yeah, so some people like the idea that Bran walked back in time and drove the Mad King mad by like saying, oh, you've got to burn all the White Walkers, Mr. Aerys. And then Aerys went crazy and said burn them all and burned King's Landing. I think that's a bit too sci-fi for Game of Thrones. Like, I know we did Hold the Door, but I think the point of Hold the Door was about, personal tragedy and cost of magic to Bran. I don't think that Bran is gonna, slip into the time stream and go all interstellar. But we'll have to wait and see. Carl says, do you think the Night King will speak? The showrunners have said that he won't. But maybe that's a misdirect. Maybe the Night King will say, "Hey yo, all I wanted was some milk from the store. Why you gotta be so rude about it?" Redrake says, reminds me of the night before Agincourt in Henry V Battle of Pelennor Fields, Helm's Deep, and most of all, the fall of Naglemund in Dragonbone Chair. I have not read the Dragonbone Chair, but yeah, those are some big-ass battles that will definitely be compared to the Battle of Winterfell. Apparently Helm's Deep was studied by the director of this Battle of Winterfell episode. So yeah, I think we'll expect some sort of parallels and callbacks to other fictional battles. Caligulov says, Jon doesn't want the Iron Throne, and therefore he will get the Iron Throne. Yeah, I think that's a good theory. I think the fact that Jon would be a reluctant ruler is part of why he might become the ruler. But again, I think it's more likely that Jon ends up some kind of sacrifice. Thank you, Ollie. Thank you, Harry. And yeah, Bran did imply that there have been lots of different three-eyed ravens. Bloodraven is only like a few hundred years old, in the books at least. Maybe in the show, the three-eyed raven is more ancient. But if we assume that the three-eyed raven has been around for thousands of years, then yeah, I suppose there has been a whole bunch of them. Before Bloodraven, it seems as though the other three-eyed ravens were children of the forest, not humans. It's a whole sort of interesting other question of whether or not, or a question of why is the three-eyed raven now a human instead of a child of the forest? And I think that's because the children of the forest are declining and they're leaving the world, and so they're sort of accepting that humans need to sort of carry the torch of keeping all the souls and the memories that the Night King wants to destroy. Bum Central says that Cersei will sleep with the Night King. Halos Oyster says, do you ever want to hunt down bad super chats and kill? It sounds a bit violent, but there are some bad super chats. We're skipping the bad ones. Unless I skipped yours, in which case it was an accident. Tony Bird says, do you think the Night King is flying to King's Landing to get 1 million more soldiers? Possibly. And Tony points out that that's quite similar to Rob's misdirect in the Battle of Whispering Wood. Jaime was defeated when one army went one place and another army went another, and maybe that's what the Night King is planning. Brink717, no, I don't think we'll see Mira again. I mean, maybe, but it doesn't seem likely. She's such a tertiary character. I don't think they've got space in the next 4 hours of Game of Thrones to talk about it. Thank you, Crisgo. What was your favorite moment this episode? Well, it was cool learning more about the Night King's motivations, but also Brienne being knighted by Jaime is just gorgeous. Charles says, does Bran go up to become the Man in Black because he was turned immortal by the proto-molecule? That is a lot of references in one sentence, my friend. Eki says, what do you think of the fate of Mira Reed and her relationship with Bran and Howland? Yeah, like we said, I don't think the Reeds will come back. I mean, Daenerys did ask a pretty pointed question of like, how do you know that you are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen? At the moment, all they've got as evidence is Bran's visions and Sam's marriage certificate that he found of Rhaegar and Lyanna, which doesn't prove that Jon is their son. So maybe we need Howland Reed to turn up and say, hey, the Tower of Joy happened. But, people don't know Howland Reed in the show, so I doubt it. In the books, probably. Xlo says, what's your opinion on Arya killing Bran with the dagger that he gives her? Ooh. Why? I mean, maybe if Bran gets, like, whited or something. I think Arya will do great things with that dagger, but I don't think she'll kill Bran. I think the most likely fate for Bran is to become some kind of tree person. Or maybe to die. But, I mean, if Bran dies, then who's the new Three-Eyed Raven gonna be, So I don't know. Thank you, Velia. Thank you, Maria. Maria says that a younger, more beautiful person will remove her from the throne. Is it going to be Daenerys or Jon? The wording's kind of ambiguous. Some people read it as a younger, more beautiful queen, and some people read it as just a younger, more beautiful person. I think Daenerys is the most obvious one, but sort of the cool, interesting one is for it to be Brienne. Brienne might not be more beautiful literally, not in the books anyway, but Brienne was called the Beauty, so in a sort of ironic way, she is beautiful, and she certainly has more quote-unquote inner beauty than Cersei, so maybe Brienne could play a role in Cersei's downfall. Thank you, Quirky Quark, who says the seed is strong. If Arya is pregnant, maybe she will be more sympathetic to Cersei, or she'll give up her crusade for something more important. I don't think Arya will get pregnant. I mean, even just symbolically, Arya is like a creature of death, and it seems really crazy for her to give life by giving birth. But also, pregnancy, I think, would get in the way of Arya's whole sort of vibe and her goal as like an independent ass kicker. So I think it would be a bit of a 180 if Arya got pregnant. That doesn't seem likely to me. Judd says that the Three-Eyed Raven is the equally evil counterpart of the Night King. It's yin-yang. They need life and death. Yeah, maybe. I mean, the Three-Eyed Raven and the Children of the Forest and the Old Gods are very sinister in the books in a lot of ways. They are very controlling, and like George Martin, the author, has a lot of short stories about like sci-fi hive minds that are evil one way or another, and there are a lot of similarities between them and the Old Gods. So I hear that. I don't know if they're gonna. I mean, I don't think they're gonna say the Three-Eyed Raven is evil in the show, but I think they certainly could appeal to some kind of balance idea where like there has to be a Night King, there must always be a Lich King, and then that's why Jon has to become a Night King or something like that. Some kind of balance, ice and fire, life and death. It might feel a bit cliche in fantasy, but I think that could be going on in sort of the magical undercurrent of the narrative. Thank you, David and Jason and Jade. Jade says Jon is the first Targaryen to get black hair. He's not, though. Like, there are a bunch of Targaryens who have, like, sandy hair or dark hair in the books, in the history. So, like, it's not unprecedented for Jon to have dark hair. It's certainly very convenient, though, because if Jon grew up with golden locks, I guess Ned would have to claim that he banged a Lannister. Colin says, do you think Dany saying fire cannot kill a dragon might mean that Viserion can't be killed by dragon fire? Yeah, well, that's a tricky question. What will kill Viserion? Fire kills whites, but fire surely doesn't kill dragons. I mean, fire did kill dragons at the Doom of Valyria, reportedly, so, maybe if it's hot enough. But, yeah, if it's not dragon fire killing Viserion, then I suppose it has to be dragon glass. Or maybe Jorah will load Heartsbane onto a scorpion bolt and just stab it with Valyrian steel. That might be fun. Thank you, Ethan and Say What. Streaks says, do you think Bran is a red herring and the real target for the Night King is Gilly's kid? That's a cool idea. Because, yeah, that's something that we mentioned in videos is that, Gilly's child was originally a child of Craster's who was meant to be sacrificed to the White Walkers. And the White Walkers did come after that baby. So you'd think that the White Walkers would still want that baby. So, yeah, maybe That'll happen. I mean, they keep saying that the crypts are so safe, and we've seen in the trailer that Gilly and her baby stay in the crypts, so maybe the White Walkers will breach the crypts and take Gilly's baby, just for a really tragic heart punch. That also sort of raises the question of, like, if the White Walkers reproduce by taking human babies, why do they want to kill all humans? They won't have any more babies to make any more White Walkers, you know? And I mean, maybe they're satisfied to just wipe out all life on Westeros, but you know, they know there's people in Essos as well, right? They know that there's a whole other continent. Are they planning to cross the sea and wipe out Essos as well? Or are they just going to, like, sit in Westeros, and Westeros will just be a dead continent until some very persistent explorer comes across from Essos to take over? I don't know. Jesse, thank you, Jesse. Thank you, T.Y. Zumba. Who says, do you think Wildfire will have a big role in killing the White Walkers? I think that Wildfire will probably burn King's Landing, probably at Cersei's hand. Or maybe it'll just be dragons that burn King's Landing. But if the White Walkers and the Whites make it down to King's Landing, then yeah, that Wildfire will be very useful, I think. Coley says, after Game of Thrones is over, do more videos on The Expanse. Yeah, we've done a couple of videos on The Expanse, and yeah, we could do more in future. There's a whole bunch of books in that we can delve into. Thank you, Cody. Cody says that Arya was being chased by Gendry in the trailer. I've had a pretty close look at those images. As far as I can see, they are like human-shaped whites. Like there's two whites chasing Arya in the trailer. Maybe it's Gendry. Didn't look like Gendry to me, but I guess that could happen. But like, if that does happen, I don't know why they'd put it in the trailer. I would have thought they'd be more careful about revealing that sort of stuff. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, Xvox. Thank you, Dasher. Yeah, a lot of these questions we sort of answered before. Thank you, Sergeant Fig the Pig and Devon. Thank you, Lewis. Lewis says, what episode will Melisandre appear? I think during the battle next season would make sense. Next episode will make sense, because like Melisandre's interest is in destroying the army of the dead. She doesn't really care about who is on the Iron Throne, I don't think. Or she hasn't talked about it lately. So I would expect Melisandre to turn up when the battle against the White Walkers is really at its climax. Dave says, do you think the Night King will mind battle with Bran for Viserion? Yes, I think that's pretty plausible, and it would be cool. TM says, does the new poster give clues as to who lives and who dies on Game of Thrones? Do you mean the season 8 Throne Corpse one? The one with all of these dead people in the shape of this one? Well, it just sort of shows everyone, doesn't it? I don't think it's I don't think they're going to tell us in a poster like who's going to live and die. That's just sort of all the main characters there. Jericho, TM Martin, Blob, Jade. Jade says, it'd be badass if Jon decapitates the Night King, then marches south and uses the head to Medusa the Mountain to kill Cersei for him. That would be cool. I wonder if a beheaded Night King head can still control zombies. That would be cool. If the Night King can't, then surely Bran can. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Science Bunnies. Science Bunnies says, who's going to die next week? Yeah, I think we said this, but I reckon Jorah is pretty likely. I think Grey Worm is pretty likely. I think Theon is pretty likely. I think Jaime is possible. And I think one of the dragons, maybe. Lots of possibilities. Thank you, Bones. Thank you, Aaron G. Aaron G points out that Heartsbane might be used in some kind of Nissa Nissa sacrifice. Maybe Azor Ahai will stab Nissa Nissa in the heart with Heartsbane. That does seem an appropriate name, doesn't it? Yeah, I agree. But I reckon Longclaw is probably going to be the Lightbringer, if anything. Finn says, love your content, you're the only source, blah blah. Interested in your thoughts on overall plot structure this season. What are the twists, turns, and finale? Oh, is that all you want to know? Is that all? I think a defeat at Winterfell next episode will be a big deal. I think that some kind of fiery disaster at King's Landing will be a climactic moment. I think some kind of big sacrifice by Jon and Daenerys will be a big deal. I imagine those as like the central narrative points, but I can't predict the season. Melom says maybe Melisandre comes like Gandalf in Helm's Deep. Yeah, I think that's pretty likely. Ebo1 Kenobi says that Ebo reckons that the girl Davos spoke to will go and fight White Walkers in the crypts. That would be fun. Dipping Swords asks about Kurt Cobain and Hemingway. Thank you, Brian. Brian says, do you think that they will kill the Night King and all the other White Walkers will fall? It's a little bit Attack of the Clones, isn't it? It might feel a bit too easy if that happens. But then again, like, are they really going to go on like a purge, going zombie to zombie, wiping out every single white that's ever lived by the time the battle's over? Like, that's something that George Martin asked. Something that George Martin asked about Lord of the Rings is like, hey, like, what happened to the orcs at the end of Lord of the Rings? After they defeated Sauron, did Aragorn's government go and, like, execute every orc, even the orc babies in their little orc homes? And the same question arises for Game of Thrones now. Like, will every zombie be individually killed? I guess it's a lot more convenient if all the zombies die as one when the Night King dies. Although my preferred resolution is that Jon becomes a new Night King and Jon marches all of the army of the dead up beyond the wall in the far north. I think that would be a more cool, interesting, tragic, bittersweet resolution. David, thank you, David. Thank you, Epic Nate. Epic Nate asks about terminology. Should we call them Winterfellites or Winterfellians? How about Winterfellows? I would like that. Tim says the Night King gets King's Landing and Dany burns with wildfire. Yeah, that's possible. Maybe the Night King will convert all the King's Landing people into zombies, and then Dany will have to burn them with dragons or wildfire to kill the army of the dead, and in doing so, destroying the Iron Throne that she's wanted all that time. And yeah, that could make sense. Ethan says, where did all the White Walkers come from? I think they were created by Craster's sons over the years. And by other baby sacrifices over the centuries. Because remember that White Walkers can be created by human babies converted into White Walkers. Never says, will Jon take the fire can't hurt a dragon test? Yeah, so Daenerys is immune to fire, but we know that Jon is not immune to fire. Jon got burned in Season 1. It's actually just sort of a show thing that they made up that Daenerys is immune to fire. That's not a thing in the books, and I think that's why it's sort of inconsistent. So yeah, I don't think they'll have Jon resistant to fire. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Lyra. Lyra says, what's going on with Theon and Sansa? Yeah, it was quite a sort of like close, intimate shot that they had towards the end here, where Sansa and Theon were sort of gazing at each other, I would say, making a bit of eye contact here at the end of the world. Maybe they are getting close. Maybe there's something happening there. I think that would be cool because like Sansa had this whole dream of being like marrying a handsome prince and being queen, and Theon is kind of the opposite of a handsome prince. Like he's this sort of beat up, broken, castrated dude. And it would be an interesting subversion if Sansa like hooked up with Theon, I guess. That would be cool. Why is everyone saying F in the chat? And also, why has the chat disappeared from the thing? Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Dasha. Thank you, Miguel. Miguel says, do you think Cersei will come save the day? Well, yeah, maybe Cersei will have like a sudden change of heart and just decide that she'll actually help the good guys after all. That would be interesting. Oh, the stream's over. Are we just offline? Is that what's happening? Huh. Alright. I suppose that's down then. Some people are saying it's back, but I'm pretty sure I'm not back. Oh, are we back again? All right, we dropped out for a bit. I'm not sure why we dropped out, but we're back. All right, so we'll try and get through the last of these super chats because like we got so close to all of them. So all right, let's speed run this. Let me pull up my window again. All right. Lightning round. Miguel says, do you think Cersei will come save the day? No, I think that she will remain selfish and self-destructive and tragic. Thanks, PBS Raptor. Jerry Aber says, do you think Jaqen will play any role this season? Nah, I think we've seen enough of Jaqen. The show didn't really know what to do with the Faceless Man, I don't think. Thank you, E. Clancy. When are they going to get to the fireworks factory? Are you saying, like, when are they going to use wildfire? Or is that a reference? I don't know. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Ahmad. Do they know about the dead dragon that the Night King has? Yeah, Bran mentioned him last episode. Idlingham says, I appreciate you understand the difference between raising the question and begging the question. I confess that I don't. I just know how to use raising the question. Thank you, AB. Thank you, Rufescent Eagle. Could the Hound play a significant role? I think he'll kill the Mountain. Thank you, Zach Silver. Thank you, Carlos. And Proper Wanderlust says, what about the magic built into Winterfell? Yeah, Winterfell is a sanctuary against the magic of the White Walkers, I think. Or it's like a sanctum of the White Walkers, one or the other. All right, so I think we got through all the super chats. I think we've been talking for long enough. Guys, thank you all so much for being a part of this stream. It's been real. We'll do it again next week. We're going to work on the Alt-Shift-X explain... I've lost my voice. See what you guys have done to me? And we'll have the video coming out soon. And buy that merch, guys. If you want an Alt-Shift-X t-shirt, if you want an Alt-Shift-X pin... you can get one at standard.tv/AltShiftX. I think you'd look good in an Alt-Shift-X shirt. I think it'd suit you. I think you'd look good in blue. So yeah, thank you for watching. And remember to subscribe and comment and like and do all those things. And yeah, let's do more Game of Thrones next week. Thanks, guys. Oh, and so Patreon supporters can get access to these live streams after they're broadcast. If you want to be able to see the streams later, you can support on Patreon. All right, thanks.